late this afternoon. And we have a change in the order of the agenda. Mr. Manager, we're going to do
Yes, sir.
the camper review first.
Yes, sir. Alice Kelly, our interim director for finance, who was the comptroller just a few short days ago, is now our taking Patty's place. She fully prepared to provide this briefing and also for us to receive our independent audit report. And Alice was instrumental with her team that she will introduce in preparing this year's CAFR.
Mayor Dyer, Vice Mayor Wood, City Council members, I'm pleased to bring you the city's comprehensive annual financial report and the results of the annual FY 2018 audit. We will briefly review highlights of the results, and our external auditors, Clifton Larson Allen, will provide the results of the audit and the required communication. In your Friday packet, you received a printed copy of the comprehensive annual financial report. The CAFR, as it's known, is a comprehensive book of all our financial transactions and provides the actual results of the fiscal year. It's the complement to the operating budget. It is audited, and per state law, the city is required to provide the Auditor of Public Accounts a copy of the CAFR, a comparative cost transmittal report, by November 30th. And then by December 30th, we have to provide a letter attesting that the mayor and the manager, from the mayor and the manager, that the city has provided a review of the CAFR and the audit results to City Council. CAFR is a very large document with a lot of information, a lot of sections, and it's a certain way it has to be presented as prescribed by GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board. And I wanted to, because we have some new council members, I wanted to just briefly go over some of the various sections and what's in each section. The introduction section has various information about the city government, including government officials as of June 30th, an org chart, and a transmittal letter. And the transmittal letter describes the city government. It also describes our economic conditions. It also describes major initiatives and some pertinent internal controls and debt policies. The financial section includes the city's independent auditor's report, a management and discussion analysis on the result of the fiscal year, and the meat of the report is the basic financial statements. They have notes, and in the required supplemental information is the budget to actual for each fund. The statistical section provides historical data on financial trends, and the city, in addition to having a financial audit, also has a single audit of all its federal grants. In the single audit section, you will find the auditor's results for internal control and the results of the single audit, as well as a schedule of expenditure for federal awards called the CFA. And after the single audit are continuing disclosures that are required for our city revenue bonds. City staff is here and has done diligent work in preparing this report. I'd like to recognize Miriam Woodson, Kevin Kilbalsa, Jamel Stewart, Patricia Kephart, Kristen Earhart, and then also I really wanted to thank Lyndon, I'm sorry your name, Remius, and Gretchen Hudome, who coordinated the audit contract with the external auditors. I wanted to acknowledge Clifton Larson Allen, our external auditors, and Greg Busneck, a partner with Clifton Larson Allen, is here to provide the audit results.
Rotating seats. Got a full house today. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greg Busneck. I'm a partner with Clifton Larson Allen. We just went through a rebranding campaign, and we're going to be known as CLA now. So that'll save you some typing and some some time when we're discussing things too. So I want to go over the audit results. I want to thank everyone for their assistance throughout the process. We work with the internal audit folks, our contract administrators. We work with the folks in finance. We work with folks in all the various departments within the city. We also work with the schools as part of the process too. But we go through, in addition to just auditing the numbers, we actually do a compliance audit, as it was mentioned, that looks at the expenditures of federal awards as well. So it's a comprehensive process. We start the process in the spring, have a planning meeting. We start as much work as we can earlier, do some work in the summer, and then we're back in the fall once the books are closed to really take a look at the numbers. So everyone's probably got a copy of the comprehensive annual financial report. It's a little over 300 pages, so it's a full-time read. If you want to sit down and do it at one time, I'd recommend doing it in pieces. Start with the management's discussion and analysis. But just to walk you through the audit results. So there you go. All right, audit results. So First thing I want to point out, the opinion on the financial statement. So when you look at what's in the comprehensive annual financial report, there's only a few pages of information that's actually our responsibility. One is the auditor's opinion. And we'll talk about the other couple of reports. The other 300-plus pages are the representations of management. So management goes through, records transactions throughout the entire year, spends a lot of time to make sure they comply with all the laws and regulations they're subject to. It's a full-time job plus. So kudos again to their help. So I want to point out it's an unmodified opinion. That's also known as a clean opinion. It's the highest form of assurance we can give, and it's what you want on your financial statement. So congratulations there. Report on internal control over financial reporting. Sometimes this is called a GAS report. We had no findings or material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. So that's a good thing for you guys. This last report, independent auditors report on compliance for each major federal program. This is the report that's in the compliance section. This is the report on the expenditures of federal awards. We did have one finding related to the Section 8 voucher program. It's related to rent and reasonableness testing that needs to be done certain times. Wasn't a significant major issue, but it's something that we have to report in compliance with laws and regulations. So I want to bring that to your attention. So it's described in Note 11. You guys have probably heard a lot about OPEB or other post-employment benefits. It's a new liability that was required to be recorded this year. Significant impact to the city overall, but I know the city had been discussing it over time. A lot of governments are impacted with this same disclosure and requirement this year. So a lot of things there. So you'll see an emphasis of matter, in our opinion, that just draws attention to the users. This is similar to what happened with pensions a couple of years ago, when the full liability, it could be an asset, but generally it's a liability that has to be recorded and disclosed. So I want to draw that to your attention. Some required communications. So as part of our process, when you're looking at the financial statements, there are some things within the statements that are accounting estimates. So there are some allowances for doubtful accounts, things like that when you're looking at taxes receivable. When you look at the pension and other, some liabilities, they're actually based on actuarial calculations. So the city, sometimes the state provides the information, but actuaries actually do some of the calculations, and we rely on their work. So we take a look at their work, look at their assumptions, look at their reputation, make sure they're properly licensed, make sure they're independent of the city, go through some process there to make sure that the estimates appear reasonable. When you look at all the information in the financial statements, the notes tell the story behind the numbers. So when you read the financial statements, take a look at the back, look at the notes, read the detail, understand what really makes the numbers up. The city's policies are included there, so there's a lot of information about how the numbers are derived. So it's important to look at that. As far as the process goes, we had no difficulties in dealing with management. They were very helpful. Everyone throughout the process was helpful, shared information with us. This is our second year in the engagement. In the second year, went a lot smoother than the first year. We want to thank everyone for their help, patience to get us through the process. No disagreements with management, no pushback as far as procedures we want to do or information that we ask for. So certainly very helpful. No uncorrected or corrected misstatements. So we didn't find any errors that we brought to management's attention that needed to be fixed. Management representation. So we do ask them at the end of the engagement to provide us, in the form of a writing, the assertions that they made to us throughout the whole process. So it's about 10 or 11-page document now that they sign, basically asserted to us that what they told us was complete and accurate, the information is complete, and they were had full disclosure with us. Group financial statements, there are some other pieces of the financial statements when you look. School board's included, some other component units are also included. So there's some additional information. When you read the opinion, it discusses the different levels of component units. Other information within the financial statements. Alice mentioned the different sections of the financial statements. When you look at those, there's a number of different sections, and you read through them. If you read our opinion and read the table of contents, you'll get a good understanding of the flow of information and what we're responsible for versus what management is responsible for. So there's RSI, which is the management's discussion and analysis, some of the pension information, some of the supplemental information, supplementary information, the combining schedules, and then the last part is the CFA, which is actually the expenditures of federal awards for the year. So you'll be able to see where the federal dollars were spent. So that's everything I wanted to cover today. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. I did want to point out that we did meet with the audit committee prior to this meeting and went into some detail, probably had longer discussions with them. And shared a lot of information with them as far as the process goes, but I'll be happy to answer any questions, or if you have anything after, please feel free to reach out.
I just have a question, and this is for not just necessarily for you, but I know there is a perception that we have never audited some things in the city. and that the only audit that really counts is the ones that Linden does. What's the difference between the ones that Linden does and the audit that is done with the finance
Sure.
department?
Our audit, we're external auditors, so our audit is mainly of the financial statements and then of significant grant expenditures. So when you look at the grant dollars, we do them on a risk base and a rotational basis. So there are times when different grants get picked up each year, but they do focus on the more material amounts. So ours is more, I would say it's more of a high level, but focusing more on the financial results. Anything that's more of a deep dive of specific concern that you may have, the internal auditors would probably do. They go into more detail. They may go into more things that maybe aren't significant dollar-wise when you look at it compared to the overall comprehensive annual financial report, but they might be significant to a specific department. Yeah, so, does that help, sir?
John?
I just have one. First of all, it's good news that, because I guess market performance or something, but I assume that the audit doesn't include an analysis of for when on the pension liabilities, it said it went down, even though obviously we were paying more money into the fund. But does your analysis take into effect as to the reasons for the changes or the positive and negative performances of the pension funds?
It does. We look at the assumptions. The actuaries do a lot of those calculations.
Where would that be found in the report?
There's a footnotes. They're pretty significant. I couldn't give you the exact, do you know the note?
This footnote 13 and 14.
Okay.
And that'll have the actuarial assumptions that you'll be able to see. And then the change in the investment values too. Sometimes the investment values go up. That'll offset the liability because you have a net pension liability. So
Right,
better
I know-
performance.
To get to Ms. Henley's point, a number of people have talked often about the amount of our negative, our liability.
Sure.
And some years it goes up substantially, some years it comes down based on the actuarial performance relative to the
Definitely.
assumption. Sometimes it's less payroll, and I'll look at the footnotes, and I guess I can get with the staff to ask the follow-on questions, but I appreciate it, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, John. Anybody else?
All right. Thank you.
So I was actually planning on reviewing a little bit more of the results of the audit, or the results of the financials. GASB, or Government Accounting Standard Board, requires the cities to report on two different types of financial statement. One is a government-wide financial statement. It takes into account the long-term view and long-term debt and all the city's assets, including infrastructure, and results in a net position for the city. Net position takes a look at the long-term or the total economic resources of the city, and it speaks to long-term operational accountability. Government fund financial statements were in Exhibit 3 and 4, and fund balance takes a more current financial resource view and measurement and speaks to the fiscal accountability and budget compliance and legal compliance. It's the more practical day-to-day measurement of a city's financial condition. Next page. There's a lot of important numbers in the CAFR. I'm going to go through some slides of financial statements, and I'll give you some brief highlights. If you have any questions, please feel free. The summary of the net position for all city funds. Our combined city and school assets are $6.6 billion, with liabilities of $3.1 billion, and a total net position of $3.5 billion. Our general fund budget to actual on this slide shows the actual revenues were $1.147 billion. Our total expenditures were $1.135 billion, and revenues over expenditures were $11.9 million. You add that to July 1st fund balance minus any reservations, which we'll review a little bit later, and the unassigned fund balance is $114.3 million, which is 9.87% of the FY19 general fund revenues. That's right in line with the city's policy of between 8 and 12% of the next year's revenues. This slide is a total revenue slide. We showed this in September in our preliminary results. It's a comparison of revenues between 18 and budget, as well as FY 2017 year-to-date. The variances in green are accounts that exceeded their budget targets. Red is under budget, and blue is under budget but exceeded prior years. The next slide is fund balance reservations. So the city's total fund balance is $230 million as of June 30th, which is an increase of $11.9 million from last year. The city has reserved $115.8 million from this fund balance, leaving the total unassigned fund balance of $114.3. The next slide is a graphic representation of fund balance over the past few years compared to the percentage of general fund revenues, which is a very strong financial position. And as you see, over the past years, we're between 8 and 12% is our policy, and we've been between that every year. The next slide is our school operating budget. The school's budget to actual is presented. The reversion number that we have is 22.9 for FY18, and our true-up is 1.5 million, and City Council has already appropriated that back to the schools. The next slide shows the major enterprise funds: water, stormwater, waste management, and parking, their total net position and the change in net position. This year, all changes in net position were positive. Our Development Authority also is shown on this slide. It had a change in net position of 26.1 million, due mainly to land transfers of the biomedical park and the former Owls Creek Golf Course. Our debt slide is next, and our debt for the city is $1.2 billion, and it's allocated between general government, schools, water, stormwater, and agricultural reserve, with the 51% being general government. And in summary, our fund balance of $114.3 million is within City Council policy. Our general fund revenues were 0.6% over budget. Our expenditures were 6.7% under budget. Net pension liabilities for city and school were 1.152 billion, and net OPEB liabilities, which now are required to be put on the balance sheet, are 269.8 million. Okay. For FY18 or FY19, we have preliminary results for November 30th through November 30th. It's challenging to show budget to actual in the middle of the year because we don't get our revenues in linear. Right now, the easiest way to show in November is the next chart, which is a graph, and basically we take an average of the fiscal year 17 and 18. The orange and blue lines are trend lines, and so we compare our percentage that we received in revenues to the percentage that we received in previous years. And as you can see, the green and the purple lines are right on target with previous trend lines. Timing and our taxes coming in December 4th or December 5th will make it a little bit easier to see the actual fiscal year results. And so we'll be presenting that in January of next year, January 15th of 2019. Our next step are our 2020 budget proposals March 26th, and our budget adoption is May 14th. So I tried to do that in very high level, but giving you some financial results, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Sure.
Thanks. Talking about the fund balance, could you kind of go back to that slide for me? So, go one forward.
The graph or the?
Yeah, the graphic representation of it.
Okay.
And I think that you and your predecessor have often said that a consistent fund balance is part of the reason why that we have such good bond ratings. But I think the other thing that's important is something that the manager talked to me about the other day, talking about the cost that we have associated with emergencies such as Matthew, the big snowstorm and things like that. And Dave, if you could address that, I mean, how much we end up paying out of pocket for those things before we get, and if we get, any federal reimbursement.
Well, we know that Matthew, the year of Matthew with the snowstorm was probably our most serious year. A commitment of funds to ride to the sound of the guns, if you will, to rescue those families that were impacted, to be able to establish recovery, to absorb the costs associated with removal of debris, and then, of course, the support that we gave to families that were displaced. That year, we spent over $10 million associated with that, and then we had a snowstorm on top of that. And I can recall that when we were together in a potential third event that was going to potentially roll up on us, we were in the EOC, thank thank goodness we didn't have that nor'easter materialize to the effect that we thought it would happen. But we were like hard pressed to say we are now going to be into a eating into fund balance and starting to do that. And my concern was that without sufficient funds and too many incidents causing that insufficiency of funds, do the rating agencies come forth and start to address with us whether or not we have in fact preserved enough capital to withstand changing conditions that we find ourselves here in Virginia Beach. And so we were very fortunate not to have had a third incident. The use of fund balance in the city has historically been after you've earned it, meaning that we have appropriated dollars to a budget, and as you saw Alice brief, you under execute your expenditures, and hopefully you're able to over produce in your revenue streams, and the delta between those provide you a luxury of putting fund balance into your fund reserves. And it's that fund reserves that provide you another layer of security when unforeseen incidents, unforeseen occurrences take place that affects our citizens and our businesses here in Virginia Beach. And I can tell you, having been serving you for over a dozen years, climate change is real. We are experiencing it, all of us together here at this table and the citizens that live in our city. The world is changing, and the incidence rates are occurring more and more frequently. And having that fund balance, having earned it and banked it, and having it available for you in the years to come is critically important. I appreciate this opportunity, Jim.
John?
I want to turn back to pensions. It's on page 95 of the full CAFR. And what I'm trying to understand, because I know at the 5-year forecast meeting we had, they talked about that our contribution rate would go up 1% every other year across the 4 years beginning, not this budget year, but the subsequent budget year, then skip a year, then there would be another 1% increase, if my memory serves me correct. On page 95, it talks about that rate, our current rate, not counting the 5% contribution from the employees, as being 13.88%. Is that a blended rate? Because we have people in different types of hybrid pension plans. So is that a blended rate? Is there a contribution rate that varies by the type of plan that they're in? I just don't I'm trying to get a feel for, they could answer it at a later date. I know you want to look that up, but.
Let me answer at a later date because I don't think it's a blended rate, but I want to double check.
Then if that's the case, there would be rates for each of those categories of employees.
Sure.
Because they have different. And then, I don't know if we set the actuarial assumptions for our particular pool or not, because I know we're with a pool within a larger framework, but I noticed that the compensation increases, including inflation, which is in our 5-year forecast, are markedly different from the actuarial assumptions in this. So I'm trying to think, to the extent that these are the actuarial assumptions and we deviated a lower range than that, that should start paying off that deficit at a faster rate. Is that correct?
Yes, it does. Depending on how the actuary assumptions and what our actual results are, it will change the rate of how fast you pay off your liabilities.
Thank you. If you all haven't looked, that starts on page 95. That's a very interesting read to look at the assumptions, because this is a bill we are passing on to future taxpayers, and it ultimately does represent a significant portion of revenues go towards paying pension liabilities. Thank you.
Shannon?
On the OPEB liabilities, as well as the pension, the city and schools are kind of lumped there together. Would it benefit us, or would it do anything if we separated that? Are we able to?
We do have that separated actually in the CAFR. I just lumped it together for purposes of presentation. But our OPEB liability consists of quite a few different types of health insurance and benefits, so it is a little bit more challenging to present in a summary form. So we try to lump it in total. So the city and school, so we have Line of Duty Act, which is one of our OPEB that the schools doesn't have and the city has. Our teachers have a different plan than the city has. So you have to really take a look at that. And I think Kevin Klobasa over there is probably one of our experts in the OPEB liabilities, but we have different funding levels depending on what the type of funding, what type of benefit we have.
I found it interesting that the city's level, percentage level, is better than the school's percentage level. Is there a reason for that?
Part of that is how the General Assembly has funded some of the pension. You're talking about pension or OPEB or both? Pension. So in previous years, the General Assembly had a percentage rate that they were given to fund, and they chose to use a different discount rate, so they funded a little bit less. So the teachers' liability for their pension funds have remained a little bit behind in the percentage that they're funded.
Anyone else?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for an excellent report. Hey, lifeguard contract?
Yes, sir. So it's renewal time for the lifeguard contract. I've asked Ed Brazel to bring forth a briefing to discuss with you what the results of the RFP process and to make you aware of the numbers and continued support for our lifeguard services at the resort.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's December. The holidays are coming, so let's talk about lifeguards and the beach. I want to talk just real quick. We give you an overview of the contract, how we got to where we are today, and what we want to recommend for moving forward. Just a refresher, we're talking about the resort lifeguard contract, which covers everything from the Pendleton surfing area through the resort and 57th Street and North End in terms of some patrols. We start early May and ramp up in Memorial Day, Labor Day are the peak times, and then we start scaling it back, going to patrols on in through September, October timeframe. The contract, we've been working with Virginia Beach Life Saving Service for many, many years. I personally have dealt with 3 previous iterations of the contract. They've all been a little bit different. In 1998, we scaled it up to expand guards on stands in Croatan. In 2005, we took the rental part. So this is pure lifeguards, has nothing to do with the rental franchise. And the last version we did was 2012, where we moved things a little bit forward in May. What we're talking about for this contract is a little bit more working into patrols in October, but essentially more or less unchanged from the previous version. The timeline, we talked to you last January, another cold day. Put it out for bid, and we've been negotiating with the vendor and are ready to make the recommendation with it going on the beach in May. Is when they'll deploy. So Virginia Beach Life Saving Service was the only agency that responded to the RFP. They offered, we'd asked actually for 2 different terms. They offered pricing for 3 seasons, 5 seasons, which each can come with 3 one-year extensions and has a 3% escalation clause. So you see the shorter term, $100,000 a season different. We put a lot of thoughts into our recommendation here, a lot of things go into the mix, the points to ponder, if you will. In 2012, we talked at length about whether or not public versus private model, and the council voted at that time to maintain a private model, and that's what we've been proceeding from that guidance since then. The city does provide lifeguard service in Sandbridge, so essentially 20% of your guarded area is provided by the city. One of the things that we've seen, particularly over the last several years, is most major beach communities have gone away from the contracted model. Myrtle Beach and Virginia Beach are really the last 2 East Coast destinations with the privately contracted model. Now that said, the bid that we received is comparable to our governmental estimate of what it would take to run a service, and Virginia Beach Life Saving has tremendous capability and skill. I think that was what we talked about in 2012 was the tradition and skill, and they've consistently demonstrated a strong performance. Looking at the term, there are some advantages and disadvantages over the longer term. If we go a longer term, it does limit our flexibility. If we see an emergent change that with services, we have to negotiate that with the contractor. And so if we wanted to change a model, 5 years is longer than 3 years. That's an obvious thing. But the longer contract term is $100,000 a season cheaper than the short term. And we do know that Virginia Beach Life Saving is a proven vendor. So putting all that into the mix, all those considerations, we would like to recommend is that we execute another contract with Virginia Beach Life Saving Service for the 5-season term, maintaining those options for the 1-year extensions. Because of the way the payments fall, the first payment is due in this current fiscal year. There's a May payment, so they can get started. And so we do need to appropriate some money for that, which we'll come back to you in January for an actual vote. And then future funding for FY20 and beyond, we're working that as part of the city manager's budget moving forward. I will, going back to the concept of public versus private, I will come back to you before 2022. It's about mid-time of the 5 years to provide an update and some recommendations on what we want to do. That gives us enough time to really build a system within the normal budgeting and public policy process or not. And that'll be come back to you in 2022. So with that, any questions?
Hey, any questions?
Just one.
John?
The contract does include that they're the first defense for liability in the event of suit, correct?
In the past, that's what we've seen in terms of litigation. That's where it started. I would defer that one to the attorney as far as how that pathways go.
I believe it's in the current agreement.
Yeah.
I have to go back and look.
Yeah.
But that has been the practice, so I'm assuming it's because it's in the agreement.
Yeah.
Right, I just want to make sure it continues to be, that's a benefit. Thank you.
Yes.
Anybody else?
Okay. All right.
Okay, thank
Thanks, sir.
you. Okay, neighborhood revitalization, Mr. Friedman.
As we reset, Andy's going to come forward. It's not a decision briefing today. This is a lead-in to what the council will be challenged to develop in calendar year 2019 as we look holistically and then demographically at our housing in the city of Virginia Beach. Our real estate tax, of course, is our largest revenue source, but it's also the pride of being a suburbanized city that we want to preserve, and we want to have programs that'll enable that housing industry to remain robust. So.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Mr. Mayor, I think I want to emphasize the title. As the city manager said, this is all about a process for developing a housing and neighborhood strategy for Virginia Beach, and we're here to get your feedback on our proposal to how to go about doing it. We're going to review the direction you provided us, some background, some key information, work that's been done to date, and how we're going to define and develop the strategy, including a proposed process. Your goals have always included for many years revitalized neighborhoods and plan for the future, and you've always for many years had a concern about our aging housing stock. The city managers asked us to work strategically across departments to address issues like this, and he asked us specifically to start talking with the council and give them the opportunity to provide feedback as we move forward. So I want to give you some background. Many of you were here when we had a briefing from the Virginia Center for Housing Research from Virginia Tech in 2017. This slide is right from their presentation to you at that time. It is a part of the input that we have received as we look at these issues. And I just want to emphasize, it is not necessarily our conclusions, but it is what we heard from them at the time. And that included the need to address aging housing, outdated housing designs, housing affordability, and potentially areas of inadequate maintenance and reinvestment. And they made some recommendations to us about reorienting new and existing housing stock from suburban to urban, increasing the value of land and the vitality of the housing market, and build upon the comprehensive plan, which identifies SGAs as areas of growth, make sure we maintain code enforcement and retain the green line. So again, I'm putting those there because that is what our study authors recommended. I already mentioned that this is a top goal of City Council, and I want to also state that the city has successfully done neighborhood revitalization in many places over the time that I've been here. In various different ways, we've done infrastructure investments, made service improvements, and done comprehensive activities. We also know that sea level rise and recurrent flooding are major threats to the city, and they potentially threaten the viability of some neighborhoods, and certainly cost of housing, as flood insurance costs and the need to refit housing to make it more resilient is identified. And we will have to consider that as we talk about what is the future of specific neighborhoods. I also want to say it's important that we address both the global issue of housing and the issue of how do we keep all of our neighborhoods vital together. They're closely linked, and while they're not exactly the same subject, we always have to be coordinated in how we address them. As the city manager said, the value of residential real estate in Virginia Beach exceeds $47 billion and creates more than $470 million in real estate tax. It is also most residents' most important asset. So as we preserve the vitality of the housing market, we preserve both public and private wealth. Also, the size of the market indicates that the city is not going to be the primary actor, but we have to figure out what are the things the city can do that most effectively address issues that come about. And so we're going to recommend an integrated housing and neighborhood strategy. Some additional information just following up. The real estate is broken down into 83.3% residential and 16.7% commercial. As many of you know, it's been in the neighborhood of 80-20 for many, many years. This is just a chart showing that information that I previously provided. We are growing in housing units at the rate, this is right from the real estate assessor's report of this year. Only in 2 years have we actually achieved a 1% growth rate. We have over 170,000 housing units in the city, but only in 2008 and 2017 did we reach about a 1% growth rate. On average, we're a little bit below 1%, actually closer to 0.7% growth rate as far as actual physical housing units in the city. As I said, our city has a history of successfully improving neighborhoods and/or areas. You can think of Shore Drive improvements, you can think of Resort Beach improvements, improvements in multiple neighborhoods as a result of resident initiatives or council concerns. It's really important that we address each area separately based on its individual characteristics. And there's lots of different things that can be done. It can be a physical improvement, infrastructure improvements, service improvements, or some combination of those. And I would just say that because we've been successful, our challenge is to keep being successful, but to do it more systematically and proactively, recognizing the challenges that are facing us in the future. Just a minute, I want to talk about the pilot project that we're involved in coordination with the stormwater investments in the Princess Anne Plaza, the Lakes, and Windsor Woods areas. It was our determination that it'd be important to plan for improvements that are coordinated with those stormwater investments that help make sure there's a vibrant future for those neighborhoods, because while stormwater is critical to its survival, it's not the only part of a neighborhood that needs to be successful. We also want to develop a process template so that as we go through a process of evaluating needs and addressing those needs, that we can not reinvent the process every single time, that we can set something up and keep using it. And we want to test some things that we haven't done and see how they work and learn from those tests that we do. This project is, as I said, coordinated with the plans for stormwater. It has already established a resident engagement planning committee with resident and staff members. We plan to conduct a survey of residents. When we get approval to do that, we want to understand the baseline perceptions of residents so we can determine if the project activities that we undertake actually move that needle in a positive manner. We also will have a VHDA grant that will help us begin a design process to look at new housing types and styles that may be more flood resilient and more attractive in the future. We have a data system that will allow us to do very detailed analyses of how things are going in the neighborhood and understand the real estate market there. We definitely have to review zoning and development requirements so they can be adjusted to help us build back better and have more resilient communities in the future, and look at housing finance programs that help incentivize the improvements that people need to do. So what is a housing and neighborhood strategy? Basically, we're talking about what is a long-term approach to achieve our city's goals and our residents' goals for housing and neighborhoods. We have to address the threats we see out there and take advantage of our many opportunities and strengths, and I'll get to how many of those there are at this time. We also have to focus mostly on our existing housing stock, because with a 1% growth rate every year, we're still looking at 99% of the housing on the ground was here last year. The plan should guide reinvestment and also new development in ways that are appropriate to achieve our city goals. So in this diagram, I've attempted to show the progress we want to make with the blue arrow pointing up, which is the comprehensive plan. And what we want our housing and neighborhood strategy to do is point the city in a positive upward direction to achieving our goals for the city and its residents, and avoid, counteract the threats that are out there, as well as take advantage of our many strengths and opportunities, which include the fact that we have excellent services and infrastructure, safe neighborhoods, proactive policing, good condition of housing, as I reported to you last fall, good schools. We have studies, plans, and investments that you have authorized, all of which point us to good information and proactive response. And of course, regional economic opportunity is critical to citizen success. And we want to achieve the goals of the city, I think, that in many cases are very well-known: quality housing, rising values, safe and vital neighborhoods, protection from flooding, and also it's really important, as you said, to have plans tailored to each individual area and ongoing dialogue with residents. This is how we propose to get to a strategy, and you will see there are many steps before we have something that you, the council, would adopt. We're going to consider studies, public input, our current plans and policies. We're not starting over. We have many plans in place, including the comprehensive plan. Look at the opportunities and threats out there, and use our neighborhood data system to make sure we have the facts on the ground and can detect what's happening and report on that. We have your appointed Housing Advisory Board that will review our recommendations before you see them. We also have your appointed Planning Commission, which will also review them before you see them. And then at the end of that, they'll be presented to you for your consideration and hopeful adoption. As I said, we want to begin a public engagement process on this whole process. And based on your feedback from this meeting, we plan to have meetings in January that are open to the public, as well as an electronic input process from publicinput.com, and then report back to you at the end of January on what we've heard as far as the overall thoughts about how do we do this and what citizens want to see and what they're worried about as well. These are some of the questions we can ask the residents, and we'd be happy to hear your questions as well. But basically trying to get at what worries you, what is great for you, and what do you think we should do about it. Our next steps are to get your feedback today and after today, begin our engagement activities, report back to you on what we hear, and then proceed with our planning process, which is an ongoing process of hearing from residents, developing proposals, and getting your feedback. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Here's Shannon.
Thank you, Andy. I know that we've got our BBCDC.
Yes, ma'am.
Which is a separate entity altogether that we appoint their board members. But I'm assuming that in January when you're going to present this to them as well and bring them in on these discussions?
Definitely. And Miss Addy is part of the Housing Advisory Board, so she would be hearing them right there at the board as well.
Perfect. I just want to make sure they're at the table. Thank you.
Okay, Jess.
Thank you for the presentation. This subject I think is fascinating and important, of course. Mr. Mayor, I would love for us to set aside some more time to discuss this, maybe when new council's on in
Oh,
January.
no
I
problem.
think that the time we have is not enough time to really dive into what, I mean, I wrote down a bunch of notes and I'll forward most of
Great.
those to you so we can talk on the side. But I hope that we also, with this moving forward, particularly since the project area includes Plaza and the lakes in the Windsor area, that we're also going to be addressing the severe repetitive loss and how we're going to move forward in dealing with the houses, because that area specifically has a major impact with repetitive loss properties. And then, I don't know if that has to roll into a totally different subject of how maybe we petition the General Assembly at our next legislative packet to make sure that there's some kind of disclosure process for new home purchasing in that area, because there's nothing forcing anyone to disclose that their house is a severe repetitive loss as it stands right now. And it's concerning to me that we're gonna roll into this project area with this idea of revitalizing when the flood maps aren't gonna change, and we're still gonna be in the same situation with houses that have flooded, and how that's gonna impact affordability in the future. So I'd like to see some more, I mean, I know we're in the very planning parts of this. I just think this is a really big issue. And particularly in terms of the people who are younger and trying to live here. I mean, it was only 5 or 6 years, 7 years ago for me when I was sharing a house in Salem with 4 other people to make my own version of affordable housing in Virginia Beach. So, I mean, this is definitely a very serious issue. But I would really love for us to set some more time aside to have a discussion as a council as well.
Given the importance of the.
This would make a great retreat.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Yeah,
Well, we'd have a lot of time to discuss it, so make it as a retreat item.
we'll make it a retreat priority. Barbara?
I think the slide 19 of the questions that we ask our residents about their neighborhoods is really critical, because, in the past, we have created a lot of new neighborhoods as we go along. But we aren't doing that anymore very much. And I think, particularly given what we're going to be told about sea level rise and so forth, we're going to find that we really are limited in places where there could be new neighborhoods. And we're going to have to be looking at the existing neighborhoods for their viability, not only according to the sea level rise, but also how livable they are and if they're places that people want to live. And, we've been doing a lot of talking about making sure that we don't do things that threaten our neighborhoods and make them places where people would not want to buy a home. And so I think this is really critical, but I think we really need to involve our residents sooner rather than later before we go very far in making any decisions, because I think it's really important to hear what our residents are thinking about their neighborhoods and how well we're doing in keeping them good places to live, because, we run into this every time we deal with a land use. Are we threatening somebody's neighborhood? And I think that is really important that we do, like I say, sooner rather than later, and start asking our residents about their neighborhoods and whether those are the neighborhoods that we want to make certain we do things to make sure we're preserving and protecting.
Okay, John?
I'm just going to make a brief comment. It makes so much sense when we're putting all of this investment in those neighborhoods to do a much more comprehensive look at. I thought it was a great idea to look at comprehensively and look, and if we're going to invest all these millions and see what else we can do to make that neighborhood even better.
Great. Good. Thank you.
John?
I asked the staff that I didn't have it at home. I looked for it in my garage, couldn't find it. But if you all don't have your current copy of that 2016 study, you might want to request one to review. And I've passed on extensive comments, which I won't belay here till I get the answers back for a later retreat. But one of the things I think we miss sometimes is taking advantage of the data that we do have at a granular level. There's a lot of stuff you can get at the census tract level, which gives you a much targeted thing to look at versus saying Bayside Borough or even a neighborhood. Neighborhood that's on the water is different than from across the street. And as you look at the census tract data, which captures a lot of demographics, even number of kids who are on free or reduced, you get a lot more, I call it, dissection of what you're looking at and what might be the things that work. So I think we need to have as granular an understanding of our city as our database supports. And I think census tract is probably the smallest molecule that we have where aggregated data is captured. So I would hope that we would, at a retreat, we'd be able to look at that and understand that subtlety. It can be 2 streets over and be a whole different look than where you're at. So I hope that when we have that, we can have that kind of understanding of not only the housing structural issues, but the underlying demographic issues that this report talked about that may be leading to the conditions that we see.
Yes, sir, and we have a data system underway that we should be able to provide a lot of detail that will be helpful.
Thank you very much. That's all I had, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Hanson.
Thank you. Council, what you're hearing today is the first steps forward in looking at our comprehensive plan in a bigger, more inclusive light. The comprehensive plan, as you know, is required to be updated every 5 years. And for the most part, in Virginia Beach, it's been a land use document. It's had various levels of personal involvement by various council members. If you were talking about the ITA, you know not a meeting went by without Barbara Henley being there and absolutely. But now that things have changed and your neighborhoods and your districts and your constituencies have been impacted one way or another, and you're looking for ways to revitalize, Mr. Ron Williams has pulled the MLT together. He's pulled his portfolio together, and he's establishing a vision for a greater comprehensive plan, one that becomes your visionary document. In my communications with our new mayor, Mr. Dyer has said that, we're going to figure out a way to get out and talk to the public a lot more than we ever have in the past. And that those workshops in the public forum on many issues can be shaped at creating the vision that you, as the new city council about to take place in January, have an opportunity to go through that visioning process in the format of public meetings that are focused on generating a comprehensive plan that has a visionary document. Because let's get real about what is 2040, how has 2040 been received, how have we been able to reinforce it. And we've struggled with the dichotomy between a budget document, a comprehensive plan document, and this 2040 thing floating out here. And so the reality is, if what you're hearing from Andy in the words of comprehensive and what I'm hearing from the way the mayor and the way the council wants to go with workshops to have those discussions, then why wouldn't we want to pursue a visionary, comprehensive, inclusive of housing and other aspects? Because, there's some members of council that really do question the SGA business, and the relook at that is necessary to find out that comprehensive agreement should also include our economic growth and where that economic growth should go. It should include, what is the impacts of stormwater? Because that document needs to be, because having multiple documents all over the place and not being able to pull them together in a document that we already call a comprehensive agreement that we all become a part of creating, we're 2 years out from having to produce a new updated comprehensive plan. I think it ought to be an endeavor on your part to consider what that comprehensive plan is so that you can incorporate all these topics all within the same document that lays out where we want to go and all the intermediate steps it's going to take to get there. So what you're seeing today is a lead-in to a bigger process that we're all going to be involved in, that will have to entail the workshops that Jessica is talking about and the processes that Barbara's been through to make sure that our comprehensive plan is there. But it's also inclusive of the people that we serve and the people that you are representing here. So that's kind of a lead in. It's a little bit bigger than I know we wanted it, but y'all were leading yourselves down that step. And Ron's tasked to put that concept together so that as we go into the new year and we figure out how we as a new council, how you as a new council, and us as management serving you, have an opportunity to engage in the public and to bring meaning to those workshops. Because we are growing our facilitation staff through our store office, and we're going to be very effective to meet your demands as you go out and figure out your way.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? It was an outstanding suggestion to talk about this at the workshops. I think that'll be very meaningful. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Andy, thank you very much. Okay, PPA for Correctional Center.
So our Public Works Department is going to come in. Our Facilities Management is here. And Kevin, you're up. So as soon as somebody gets their charts up. And we're joined today by our sheriff and staff, who is our customer, our client for this project. And this is one of those things that requires a city council action. So, Kevin?
All right, thank you. Mayor, members of City Council, I'm going to give you a discussion on the Correctional Center Mass Control PPA comprehensive briefing. With me today is Sheriff Ken Stoley, and with Sheriff Stoley is Captain Lancia, Tom Nicholas with our facilities engineer, and Steve Allen, the project manager for Mass Control Project. A little bit of history. The current Mass Control Center was built as part of the Correctional Center Edition back in 2006. It's got outdated software operating system, a lot of analog equipment, and that outdated equipment is causing software upgrade conflicts. Inside Master Control, the current interior lighting is inadequate for a 24-hour operation facility, and the room layout is not as efficient for the current operations. So as part of that effort, in FY15, CIP 3523 Correctional Center Mass Control Center upgrade was created. It received an infusion of money in FY16 and an additional infusion of money in FY17, bringing the total project costs up to $5 million. And again, it corrects those issues. In the meantime, in FY18, CIT 3706 Sheriff Inmate Tracking and Status Monitoring Project was created and approved as part of the budget. This allows staff mobility and freedom from repeated returns to logging stations. It does it all in real-time record of activities. It records the inmates' activities, meals they receive, care they receive, and it also provides a searchable database. So if an inmate says, I didn't receive a meal or I didn't get to see medical, they'll be able to look in that system and they'll know immediately whether it actually took place or not. So we went and we kicked off Mass Control Center upgrade. First place we started was the DVR system. DVR systems were outdated, were beginning to fail. That was their biggest pain point. We needed to correct that immediately. So in March of 2016, we did a quick design. Purchasing helped us out. They went out and looked at some cooperative contracts and chose Safeware Corporation to deliver that DVR replacement. And in April 2017, that work was completed. So while we were completing phase one, Sheriff Stoley received an unsolicited proposal for mass control upgrades. We rejected that initial proposal. It didn't meet all of the needs and the requirements and the upgrades of the PPE that needed to be addressed in master control. And our thought was to potentially use a design build delivery method to solve that problem. In April 2017, we met again with Sheriff Stoley. He directed us to use the PPA process. He wanted a PPA process used to deliver this project. So in May 2017, we issued that PPEA, or purchasing issued the PPEA solicitation. We received proposals from 3 offers: Access Global, Security 101, and R&S Corporation. Upon completion of the evaluation, they selected R&S Corporation to enter into negotiations with. So in March 2018, we worked on the negotiations. We refined some of the scope. We had some IT discussions on the RFID as an option. It is just an option. We have until May of 2019 to decide whether to move forward with that under this contract or not. In this month in December, we received that best and final offer. So a breakdown of how that would play out. We have the City of Virginia Beach and R&S Corporation is our contract. 3523 Correctional Center Master Control upgrades. Their best and final offer for that was just over $4.1 million. We'll add in an owner's contingency for a total master control upgrade cost of just over $4.3 million. With the sheriff inmate tracking and status monitoring, their price came in at just over $741,000. We'll add in a 5% contingency into the contract for just under $779,000 for that effort, giving us a total contract value of just under $5.1 million. What's important there is we're not looking for an additional appropriation. Each contract, each project, CIP, CIT, has the funds available to support this effort. As far as the schedule, we're looking at a construction start. If we get through this process, our goal would be to enter into this agreement, get a construction start going in February 2019. That drives us about 2 years, just over 2 years. Final completion of February 2021. Seems like a long time, but unfortunately, in doing this effort, we've got to shuffle inmates within the building while the contractor works in certain sections. And it just takes time and coordination between the contractor and the sheriff's office to facilitate that effort. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mayor and Council for questions or comments.
Anyone? John?
Yeah, I had a number of questions that I sent in advance, not so much about the project, but trying to understand, one, the source of how it's financed based upon the useful life of the equipment, because I know the IT stuff, servers, and I assume this is a server-based system somewhere on site, correct?
Yes.
Servers usually about 8 years, or at 6 year point, you start seeing board failure, and at 8 point, it's just asymptotic failure rates on CPUs. So what are you banking on as the life cycle longevity of your underlying server?
Let me
The reason why I'm asking this question for the members here is if this is largely IT, which is highly quickly depreciating, and then the user base to support it quickly goes to obsolescence, you wouldn't want to be using bonded debt. And so I'm very
We're not.
interested.
These were pay-as-you-go funds.
Okay, that was one of my questions.
Right, and
thank you
Mr.
very
Moss, I apologize for not getting your answers to you until about, just about 1 minute or before 12:30 today, just due to the timeline I had to work with you. But you do have those answers, and
Great.
Kevin Fairley from IT is here, who prepared, because most of yours were software and service
Right.
life and all that. So Kevin will jump up here with Kevin. This will be the Kevin team, and they will provide you those answers. But PAYGO is the answer to question
That
one.
was my key concern. Thank
Yes,
you
sir.
very much. And if other people are interested, I'll be free to read those. I won't take up other people's time.
Okay.
And if I have a follow-up, I'll ask you. But my principal concern was we weren't using bonded debt to finance a
Yes, sir.
highly
We're not.
depreciating asset.
Right,
Thank you very much.
and Kevin did prepare some very thorough answers for you,
Thank you,
of the
Kevin.
work order and everything, so, we're happy to answer follow-ons.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Can I get a copy of his questions and answers? The copy's sufficient. Thank you.
I'll forward it to you.
Appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Okay, quality flood control.
Can I trespass on your time for 1 second?
Excuse me, Mayor Dyer?
Yes.
Can I trespass on your time for 1
Yes,
second?
sir, Ken.
I want to thank all of you for the support you show in the sheriff's office. I think this is the last meeting for this council. And for the winners, I want to congratulate you. For those who are leaving council, I want to thank you for your service and your support. And I've stood for election for 8 times. I've stood for election 8 times, 9 if you count the primary. I've lost 1, and I have won the rest. And I think that the voters made the right decision in all the cases and all of my elections. And so I want to thank you all for what you've done in the past and what you're going to do for us in the future. And wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Quarterly flood.
Yes, sir. So, as requested by council, at the last meeting of your quarterly sessions, we've come forward and provide you our flood control project update. Tony Alger is not available today, so you got her boss, our city engineer, Phil Pullen, and his boss, the Director of Public Works, Mark Johnson. And I'm sure his boss's boss, Deputy City Manager Tom Leahy's here, so.
Thanks, Dave. Good afternoon, Mayor. Good afternoon, and council members. I am not Tony Alger. That is correct. She is on leave for a while. So I will be giving the quarterly update on the flood control projects for the fourth quarter. And I'll jump right into it. Here are the 11 projects that she reports on. This includes 7 major projects that are in the that were in the program that Mark briefed last week on the stormwater funding. There are also 3 ongoing stormwater projects that are in the CIP, and then the stormwater master planning. You can see here on her dashboard, 9 of them are on schedule, 2 are not on schedule, and I will explain that shortly. Here is the map that shows where those 11 or 9 projects are in the city. First one, Aragona Drainage Improvement Project. Now this project includes upsizing stormwater pipes and inlets to relieve roadway flooding. The first phase is fully funded. And the fourth quarter activities are these. I will not read them, but I'll just give you the highlights. The design of the project is complete. Citizens information meeting is scheduled for January 24th. Hopefully we've got that on the calendars. The construction advertisement is scheduled for February and March. It was delayed from November to February, March. And the reason why this project is delayed is because when we were doing the modeling, the stormwater modeling for this particular area, we found out a value engineering that we could do, so we're incorporating that, and it'll make for a better project. So more efficient project, it's just going to take a couple months longer to initiate. Asheville Park, this project will provide improvements to address severe roadway and property flooding. Project's being delivered by way of a cost participation agreement with the developer, and roadway work elements are being delivered by both the city and the developer. Total project cost is $11 million. Here are some fourth quarter activities. I won't go over all those. They're in your package. Again, some more fourth quarter activities. I'll hit on a couple of the highlights. Whoops, one too many, sorry. We did execute the CPA and property dedication agreement on October 31st. And we had a citizens information meeting on November 15th, amongst many of the other meetings we had, but that was a formal CIM. As part of this project, the city is delivering the Lake Weir project, and it's about 50% complete in construction. It is going to be completed in the spring here in April. Ms. Henley is very familiar with this project. We've been working closely with you, and hopefully we've solved some of the citizens' issues, but there's a photo, and it seems to be going well. Central Resort, a multi-phase project to address severe flooding down in the resort area. Oh, yes, ma'am, sorry. Stop.
You weren't going to get away from Asheville Park that fast. A couple of questions. When we're increasing the BMP level, I mean the amounts and so forth, which are part of this, would add some new ones and then enlarge them. How much actual new storage do we get, and how much is just taken up with groundwater that's going to come into a new pond?
We get a lot of storage. We're adding a lot of ponds for storage. That's pretty much the main tenet of the project.
I know. And so can you make some, and you don't have to do it now, but that's a question that has come forward as well. Yeah, but a lot of it is just going to be groundwater filling up that new space. It's not going to be space for new.
I see my boss has stood up so he can answer it.
It's roughly, the amount of storage we'll be able to trap is roughly double.
Double what we have now.
Yes, our ability, and I believe, I don't know if I got the numbers exactly right, I can actually search some emails, but we are taking up the dry storage during the storm almost 100%.
Now, but I mean, the new is actually creating that much more storage. It's not just going to come up with
increasing the lakes and pulling them down farther. So you have more depth and bigger surface area.
And just another comment, just in case the rest of you haven't driven around down county and seen all the stop the pumping signs. The public is pretty much convinced that this is not a good thing. I'll just share that with you. And we still need to keep looking at what we're doing there and understanding it.
Yes, ma'am. Understand.
Barbara, to your point, I did ask in a note that I think it's good at a future date that in all these projects by project, we say, are we restoring capacity that we lost? Or are we adding new capacity? Or are we adding the capability to create capacity by moving the water faster? I do think the public likes to know what the output is of the activity.
I think that's the important thing. And I know that we have just started a major water quality testing project.
Yes, ma'am.
To answer the concerns about the water that is going into the bay from these. And I think you started that in maybe the 1st of November. And I hope we can, I think it was going to take 6 months to get some real findings, but if we could kind of let folks know as we go along what we're seeing.
Yes, ma'am.
Because there is a lot of concern that we are pumping impurities into the bay and causing degradation of the bay and so forth.
We will
So
do that,
if we can kinda
but
keep
trust me, we
abreast
are
of
not
that.
pumping impurities, and
I know.
we are
but,
not.
I mean, I think once you start having feedback from what is showing up, the sooner you can share that with the public, the better.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I build on that just for a second, Ms. Henley? Getting to your point about people thinking about stopping the pumping.
Yes, sir.
Since we have the ability, and I have spent some time with Tom and the company at the conference room looking at the interactive modeling that we have, reading words is one thing, visually seeing it is another. And that kind of software should provide us the ability to really show the interaction of where the wind tides are versus displacement. We should be able to visually show to people that interaction to really put in, because people are visual learners today, that's just how it is. And to visually see that in fact, the pumping isn't the source of this added elevation of flooding, or maybe the model will show us that we're wrong and it is, but either way, to use the stuff that we have the capability to
Right.
visualize that flow of water over time, and it should be able to support that.
Yes, we can probably do that. Yes, sir.
Great.
All right, Central Resort. Central Resort is a $113 million project. Only $800,000 has been appropriated to date, and we're using that $800,000 to implement or start the design of a project to replace an existing 54-inch pipe under 24th Street. That's about a $6 million project, but we are going to start the design on that. And again, the fourth quarter activities show that we began design work on that. The Lake Chubb Lake Bradford project is a compilation of projects addressing flooding in Church Point, Chubb Lake, and Lake Bradford. $32 million worth of projects. Fourth quarter activities are these. I won't go through them to save some time. They're in your package. Eastern Shore Drive Drainage Phase 1. Now, this is a multi-phase project that includes tide gates, pump stations, the Cape Henry Canal. Estimated cost at $72 million. Only Phase 1 here, Section 1 and 2 are currently funded. That's the what you see on this chart. On the fourth quarter activities are these. The first delivery project is this Cape Henry Canal improvements. We're slightly behind schedule on this, as I reported back on the dashboard. This is the second project. This is really due to coordinating with HRSD and some utility issues that we've had. But we are on schedule to advertise next month in January. It was supposed to be back in November, but on schedule for next month. Again, some additional fourth quarter activities. You can see we're a lot of coordination with HRSD on this project. The next project is Sherwood Lakes. This project will will provide improvements to address roadway flooding in the neighborhood, property flooding, $3 million. It's broken into two projects, a pump station with intake and outfall pipes, as well as a connection between the two lakes. The fourth quarter activities are these. Construction started on the interconnect pipe system. November 1 was NTP, and the pump station project scheduled for NTP next month. So we'll have both of those going shortly. Southern Canal Lead Ditch and Culvert Project. This project is for design and construction of drain improvements in the to the canals and lead ditches in the southern watershed, funded at $1.4 million a year. We currently have 4 active projects that were shown there. The first one here is the Dawley Road between Pleasant Ridge Road and Gumbridge Road. And it is ongoing. I'll give you the schedule in a minute. The second one is Pleasant Ridge Road west of Dawley Road, Site 6, reshaping and regrading some ditches. The third project is Site 7, Pleasant Ridge Road and Charity Road intersection. And the last one is Site 9, Gumbridge Road between Dawley and Charity Neck. All these we're working with operations. They're doing some of the delivery. We're doing some. The ditch work on all those will begin in early 2019.
Mrs. Henley.
If I could, I think something neat here. I did get a chance to talk with Tony about this last week, and I think it's kind of neat. It's very coincidental that this project, this lead ditch, is the subject of some material that I just happened to get within the last week or so. I had this previously, which is the 1860 agreement that was put to record with the property owners at that time to dig this lead ditch initially. And it was from Princess Anne Road all the way to Beggar's Bridge. And of course, the way it was always done, and see, the thing is, the people used to do all of the drainage. This was not a government program. And this is the way it was done all over down here. The people would get together, and you see listed in this the property owners who are affected, how many acres they each had, and they agreed to do work and to pay for constructing this lead ditch, or digging it. It wasn't constructing, digging it, according to how many acres each one had. And that's really, really neat. And then I had that, but then this I got just 2 weeks ago. This was an updated agreement put to record in 1889. And you see the changes in the property owners' ownership at that time. But the neat thing is that with this data, we can actually see when this lead ditch was first created by these property owners and which properties they were draining. And they continue to maintain this. The people continue to maintain it into the 1970s. So up until about 50 years ago, it was all done by the people. And this is the record book that was kept in the 1940s.
Wow.
And you see each property owner, how many acres, and of course, as time went on, there became more property owners because the properties were subdivided more, which also made it much more difficult for them to, all keep up with everybody. But I have records up until the early 1970s that showed that the people did the work and paid for it, even building the bridges, which was kind of neat because they were wooden bridges, but that was a big part of what they did. But when you think about it, it's only been within the last 50 years that this has been a city or a government responsibility. But what I want to do is take advantage of the records that we have, even up until the last ones that were done in the 1970s, because it's very easy to take these property owners and ask them to look and make sure their property is being dealt with this lead ditch as it
Right.
should be.
Yes, ma'am.
And the neat thing is in the last ones, it shows that there were some north of Pleasant Ridge Road, some south of Gumbridge Road, which I think is pretty much what's incorporated in this project.
Yes.
But this is the Pleasant Ridge Drainage District, and which was actually created, and of course the Beggar's Bridge in doing it together. And this was done throughout the area. And I think as we go back and look at all of these lead ditches, talk about having the opportunity to have people participate, it gives us an opportunity to ask the people in the areas of each of these lead ditch projects, and we did one earlier this year on just the other side of Pleasant Ridge Road, and make sure that people understand. But see, as these things got more subdivided and you had more property owners, people didn't realize they were supposed to keep up their own ditches, and so they didn't. But if one person didn't keep up his ditch in this whole system, the whole thing went
Cog in the wheel.
And that's why they had to all do it. And they did. It's kind of amazing. The reason I have this is my grandfather, I guess, was treasurer, and he was keeping all the records, but it's really neat to watch it. So I think I would really like to, as we do this project over the next couple of months, be able to particularly bring in the property owners whose property is affected and let them see you know, what we're doing in the ditch and all of these that are, particularly along Dolly Road, if you look, there was a lot of subdivision along in there and a lot of new people. But the other thing you need to understand is that as this stays farmland, the farmers maintain the field ditches, still even today. And it's only the lead ditch that the city is maintaining. And that's what happens when they're subdivided. Then the farmer is out of it, and those individual ditches are not maintained. But the farmers are still maintaining the field ditches, which is a really important component of all of this and why we have to keep the agricultural people as a part of it. But I really look forward to being able to float some of this stuff and show folks how it was done. But we've only been responsible for it in the last 30. So when people say the city's never cleaned it out, that's because the people used to do it themselves and assess each other for it. It's kind of neat. But just looking on one of these, if you go back to the second project, I'm hoping you've just got the circle in the wrong place. One more back. That's the intersection on this one.
West of
I
Bell.
don't think that's where the problem is. I think the problem is a little more west. It would really be a little west of where the old railroad right-of-way was, in between those two wooded areas.
We'll look,
That's
oh,
where
I
it
see.
really
We'll look at that.
floods. And, I mean, yesterday it was terrible.
Okay, we'll look at that.
That's the bad place, and just for full disclosure, that property on the other side is part of my siblings' property, and
We will look
found
at that.
some on this side, but I think that one is in the wrong place. I
Okay.
think you're looking, I don't know of any problem where you're looking there. I think it's further up.
We'll look at that, yes, ma'am. All right, good stuff, good history stuff there. The Stormwater Master Planning Project, everybody should be aware of this. 31 drainage basins models that we are developing for the city that are going to be state-of-the-art. We haven't updated the old plans since the 80s. What we've done in the fourth quarter here, this chart shows where we are right now. But basically what we've done in the last quarter is in the southern watershed, Canal Number 1 South, that 9 is completed. So basically all these will be completed by the end of the year with a few remaining completed next summer. So we're coming to the end of this important initiative.
Mr. Moss.
Have we considered using our side scan sonars that we have? We have some towed sonar capability, or maybe autonomous things aren't that expensive and they're relatively dynamic, to digitize our canals after they're dredging so that we can feed a digitized capacity, and then we can actually know on a numerical basis the degradation of capacity over time, because that's not a hard thing to do today.
No.
That's a very inexpensive process, and if we're collecting all this data, knowing how you're losing capacity over time would be a smart thing to know, because it helps us to more just-in-time maintenance is what I'm thinking.
I believe we do some post-construction surveys. I'm not sure if we use sonar, if we're just doing traditional survey.
With autonomous vehicle, you could digitize the whole canal
Right.
and the lakes as well, and once you have it, it's an immense data capability for analysis.
So these watershed models will be done again by the end of next summer. The big bogey here is Windsor Woods, Princess Anne Plaza, and the lakes. I have to report here that this was a $129 million project. It has gone up to $353 million. Mark reported that, so he was the bearer of bad news. But the reason for this is the $129 million was really based on an estimate that we developed conceptually without any engineering. In this past quarter, we've had the engineering preliminary analysis come in, and we realized we need pump stations, as we thought before, and gates, but they're much larger pipes. We need about 10 miles, 10 miles of pipes in these three areas to satisfy combat the flooding, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. Fourth quarter activities, outside of the major project, we're still doing some interim projects. Here's 5 canals, dredging projects that we have undertaken. 2 are complete. 2 others will be finished next month, and the 5th one will be finished next fall. Some pictures of those. The Windsor Woods Canal looks pretty good. Northgate Ditch looks great. Windsor Oaks West of 3rd, that hasn't started yet, but that's a pre-construction picture. It'll begin next month. Additionally, we have some other projects, interim or some smaller projects, Clubhouse Road, and then what we call the 3 FEMA reimbursement projects. Design is underway of those. We also have submitted for a VDEM grant for Clubhouse Road and the Thalia Creek Greenway, Thalia Creek Tide Gate, which I'll talk about here in a minute. The FEMA reimbursement projects are these pipe projects shown here. Project 1 is scheduled for construction in July of 2020, and 2 and 3 scheduled for construction in January of 2020. Again, Clubhouse Road, another kind of interim project, $2.7 million, installation of a large stormwater pipe. The design will be completed in early 2019, and construction will really be dependent on if we get that grant. We'll be ready to go in early 2019, but if we might have to wait till May to see if we get the grant, because if we start construction before we get that grant, we would not get the grant. Okay, one of the big major projects in this initiative here is the Thalia Creek Tide Gate project. It is a $6.7 million project. Tide Gate located on Thalia Creek, east of Mount Trashmore. We've talked about that in the past. It's under design, scheduled to go to construction in 2020. As part of that project, well, here's a rendering of what we're talking about there. As part of this project, we need a pump station, which we're also designing, but in the interim, we'll put in these interim pumps. They'll mitigate some flooding, but the full benefits will not be realized until the permanent pump station is installed. Fourth quarter activities, we've done a lot of public outreach. As you can see here, we've had a series of public meetings that my staff have attended almost weekly here. And we're informing the public on what we're doing, but everything is positive. They just say get it done sooner than later. Now, the overall Windsor Woods, Princess Anne Plaza Lakes project is what we've shown here on this map Tony showed in the past. Again, the preliminary reports come back and it says we need 3 major tide gates and barriers at Thalia Creek, the one I just showed you, North London Bridge Creek, and South London Bridge Creek. We also need 2 large pump stations, one at Lake Windsor and one at North London Bridge Creek. And the last thing we need is storage capacity. We need about 400 acre feet. So that's a 4-foot deep pond, 100 acres big. And it just so happens the Rosemont, the Bow Creek Golf Course is about 100 acres. So that's kind of where we're headed, is looking at using the golf course as a storage facility. We're in talks with Parks and Rec about that, and we're working on that.
One of the residents has suggested that.
Yeah, I mean, we have some options there, so that looks to be one of the courses of action we need to. The golf course is about 100 acres, Mike?
No, the pond.
430 acre feet is what we need.
Acre feet.
Acre feet, so 4 feet deep, 100 acres.
One thing they were throwing out is a football field is about an acre, so you need about 1 foot, 400 football fields.
So we break the cost down and it's shown it this way. For Windsor Woods, you can see that the portion of costs attributed to Windsor Woods, most of it is in storm drains. In Princess Anne Plaza and the lakes, the majority of the cost is in the additional storage, because that's where the Bow Creek Golf Course, if we go with that option. So again, this project went up significantly, and we are moving on to try to develop some deliverable solutions. So, any questions or discussion, please?
Jessica.
It's not really related to this specific presentation, because some of my concerns were answered in it when I was reading over the packet, but with respect to Kempsville and Centerville, since we don't have any active projects in those areas, Sabrina and I are hosting our town hall tomorrow, and I've been, in the last over year and a half, I've been reached out to by numerous residents who live in the Indian Lakes, Bellamy Manor, pretty much all of the residents that are very close to Providence Ditch. And I've spoken with Tom about it on a couple instances, and I think that once we have the analysis, that might be something we need to start looking at. As far as I know, there was a CIP, maybe it needs to be revised, but also some people, because of our town hall, reached out to me about some flooding near Stumpy Lake. I think it's excellent that we've put so much work into the areas that were so heavily impacted by Matthew, but I think that we're also going to start, maybe in this next budget cycle, have to really take a look at Centerville and Kempsville as well, because while the flooding was not as bad, and a lot of that was attributed to the fact that the people were flooded, at least in Kempsville, were able to deal with that problem financially by themselves. I do know that we are gonna have to start looking at that, particularly Witch Duck Road. And then, Tom, maybe you can answer this question. This is the first time I've ever seen on Farrell Parkway, there was a truck pumping, water out of the street on Sunday.
I can find out, it could have been a lot of things, it could have been a stormwater issue,
Well,
could have been a sanitary sewer issue.
That area is always bad in terms of water collecting when we have rain, but it's the first time I've ever seen a truck out there actually trying to get rid of water, so.
So, I think the last time I spoke with Mr. Johnson, we talked about some updates in Centerville. I don't have the information with me now, but there are some updates in Centerville and some progress that has been made. And I'm going to share that with him tomorrow, but did you want to talk about that?
Most of it's roads in Centerville, but in Kempsville, I mean, we've got a Bellamy Manor neighborhood rehab project going on. Over in Centerville, we've got 2 neighborhood rehab projects going on. And that's I'll call it the base where we start. We go in, we clean the system, we TV the system, we see if any defects are there. If so, we fix them. Then we turn around and we look at the stormwater modeling and see if the model tells us that there needs to be any, I'll call them pipe upsize improvements, or maybe creating more flood storage capacity. And then from that, we'll develop estimates, and if it becomes a full CIP project, we'll do that. So we've got that system, and it sounds like there's a back truck cleaning out a blocked storm drain system on Farrell.
I was happy to see it, I just was curious.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Okay. John?
You know, this was a great brief, and I did appreciate it. I spent a lot of time on that. But it gets back to the other memo that we got on December 7th from the city manager. You may recall at the 5-year forecast, I asked if we could get an update on where we were relative to the CIP on the allocation of our debt, and it gives us our indications. There's no way all these projects we saw up here are gonna be pay-go projects. So in reality, there's a lot of bonded debt that's associated, I think, with all these projects in anybody's lifetime around this table, and I don't think people want to wait for the next generation to get through. So it definitely means a big discussion on the allocation of our debt. And either one, we have to change our debt policy in consultation with our willingness to raise revenue, and with the finance houses in New York who provide the money that we borrow, or we have to reallocate the debt we've already programmed because we think public safety and this stuff is more important. But that's a fundamental discussion, and I think it will require a bond referendum to raise this magnitude of money to make any material difference that really reduces the risk exposure that we are facing. And I think anyone who looked at what Houston went through and saw what North Carolina went through, if someone told me I had to pay 5 cents more or 10 cents more to keep that from happening, I'd be highly interested. But we have to be able to articulate that to people. But this is an important discussion for us to have, because short of taking on some significant financial debt, that's my personal opinion, we cannot, in any aggressive, I call it responsible way, fill any of those gaps that we just talked about. So I hope that is something that we can follow up, and I've asked some additional questions regarding these graphics to help educate us on the hard choices that we face.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Hanson, you think with Phil up there now, we can go ahead and do the Atlantic Avenue reconfiguration while he's standing up there?
I've got my.
If you would like to, we can. Absolutely.
You mind if I bring in my
We
man?
have a team, so if we'll just take a second, and I'll take this opportunity to respond to Mr. Moss's suggestion and tell you, totally agree. And we are working diligently. I've tasked staff to engage bond counsel, and we are getting set legally to know exactly what classifications of debt, what is authorized with regards to enterprise funds, to be able to have that very frank and astute financial, legal conversation as we go into the new year. because I believe you would look to me to be, as the manager, to construct a solution to these dilemmas, to these issues, to these new numbers that we're showing you, and that is part of our staff's responsibility to give you those recommendations. So
And,
working on it.
And thank you to staff for aggressively pursuing this problem that we're having in a very judicious way and very positive way. Thank you.
And I would close, Mayor, just by agreeing with John Moss to say, we don't want to experience those unfortunate incidents that Houston and our fellow resort cities and cities in North Carolina, our sister state of North Carolina, had occurred to them. So, yep, we're working on it. Yes, sir. Mr. David Jarman is here to talk, to provide you an update on Atlantic Avenue.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor Dyer, members of City Council. I am not Phil Poland. My name is David Jarman with the Public Works Engineering and Transportation Group, and wanted to walk through the Atlantic Avenue reconfiguration update for you today. We'll start off with a couple of slides just kind of showing you the original kind of setup there with Atlantic Avenue and Pacific for the Marriott approved plan there with PHR. And the second slide will show you kind of the proposal here with the cul-de-sac that we have out there. So these are just kind of in your packet. You've seen them before, but just to give you reference of kind of where we are and show you kind of the original and kind of what's proposed now. If we slip to the third slide, this shows you a view looking on 40th Street, a typical section, and you'll notice there's basically 3 lanes out there. We've eliminated the on-street parking in the current design, and we've shown to make space for 2 left turn lanes out there. So you'll see a 3-lane section with landscaping and sidewalks out there. The next slide shows you this is a view from the 40th Street intersection looking north towards the cul-de-sac, the proposed cul-de-sac on Atlantic Avenue. And you'll notice here the curb lines basically stay the same. We have some on-street parking, we have 2 lanes, and we have shared lanes for bikers as well as sidewalks and landscaping there also. Some of the project features we want to kind of touch on real quick. We are losing some on-street parking. That is a fact with the project. We're losing 16 spaces. They're accounted for. That's 12 on 40th Street and 4 on Pacific. We're gaining 6 spaces on Atlantic Avenue as part of our discussions with the residents out there and some of the other owners. So it's a net loss of 10 parking spaces. Just want to make sure everybody's clear on that. One of the other features of the project that we tried to accommodate the Oceans condominium. They're very adamant. They did not want any right-of-way impacts to their property, so we tried to accommodate that as well. And also there are left turn lane at Pacific and 40th where there are not today. There's also a new signal at Pacific and 40th, and there is no signal at Pacific and 42nd Street. So just make sure everybody's clear on that. And then finally, one of the biggest commitments in this project is the city's funding commitment of $245,000. That was crystal clear when the project was approved. A little bit of project history. I'm not going to read all these to you, but you just have kind of a synopsis of the major milestones on the project. Obviously, we're 2 efforts there with the TPOF grant funding opportunities, and because the outcome of both of those, the developers decided to move forward and fund the construction improvements on with his own investment funds. With regards to public engagement, flip to the next slide there, Bill. Thank you. We've had several briefings and discussions with the community out there. You can see the list of the civic leagues and associations we met with. There was also a public hearing on March 17th, 2017. That goes back to when the city resolution authorizing the original TPROF application. And then finally, PHR has been part of those briefings and discussions with the HOA. They've been standing there with us in those meetings as well. The next slide shows you the total cost estimate for the project. It's about $2.9 million, almost $3 million. And again, just reiterating at the bottom there with that asterisk, the appropriation is $245,000 for our share of what's going on out there. The next slide, the project status and the path forward. Just currently where we are right now, the 90% plans have been completed. That covers pretty much all of that $245,000 that the city had appropriated. PHR is contracting with a design consultant to complete the plans, and they'll have to submit a 100% set of plans that are in conformance with the city requirements, obviously based on those 90% plans. Ultimately, DSC is going to have to review and approve the final plans, and that'll certainly be contingent upon review comments and the real estate acquisition that we'll discuss here in just a second. The bottom part there is one parcel. I think you probably saw that in the news, the Glover parcel. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. We're working on that right now with an appraisal that's due on the 14th. The city attorney is working on a 3-party agreement of sale, which is essentially our normal standard agreement, just with a third-party payee, which would be PHR. And again, just reiterating with the last bullet, PHR is going to fund the real estate cost and dedicating a portion of the roundabout right away for the city. Next slide just lays out the acquisition summary. This just shows you where property acquisition is needed. The Glover is the only private entity that negotiations are going to need to be made with. The Atlantic Coast and Oceanfront investments are both part of PHR's development. And the City of Virginia Beach property is the portion of the state property that was dedicated to the city that we would need to convert that into right-of-way to make the roundabout work. Okay, the next slide shows some more details on the Glover property. We thought this would be appropriate given some of the conversations that had gone on last couple of weeks. Just to give you a little bit of detail, if you look, pointer doesn't work, but the triangle, I can show you right here. This triangle right here, that's the right-of-way that's needed. This area right here is a pedestrian and traffic control easement. And then the area in red or pink, that is a temporary construction easement. So just to kind of lay out those areas for you. The main tenants in talking with the property owners, he doesn't want the sign to be impacted, so this allows the sign to remain in place for now, and there's no permanent parking lot impacts that are associated with what we're doing here today. So this kind of addresses Mr. Glover's concerns. As far as utility relocations, there's 2 major players out there. It's Dominion Energy and Cox Communications. And certainly Gold Key, or PHR, is coordinating with them right now. Bill, if you can flip to the next slide. Just wanted to show you just a synopsis of, this is just Dominion Energy, what's needed out there. There's a couple poles that have to be relocated. You can see them noted in red. These 2 poles, this pole has to be a new one. And so we're having to move poles to accommodate this. To do that, they're going to have to install duct bank as well. So the initial cost estimate that they received from Dominion was about $250,000 to pull all the cables. We think the duct bank cost is going to be equal to or greater than that. So they're looking at least probably $500,000, perhaps more, to get all the duct bank and get all the utilities underground that are needed. So that's a pretty significant investment on their part. Back to the previous slide. As far as construction, again, reiterating that PHR is going to fund and manage that. Their goal is to start as early as possible in 2019. However, that start date is dependent upon the city approval of final plans and some of these the utilities working out and the Glover acquisition as well. So we estimate the construction duration is going to take about 9 months. Obviously, they like to get done as soon as possible so they could get out of Pacific Avenue and 40th Street before Memorial Day. That's a wise goal. But the work sequence is going to have to start on 40th Street to maintain the traffic there. And obviously, the city is going to be providing inspection services to protect our interests on the project. So that was a quick run through on that. I can answer any questions if you have them.
So, a couple of things. The Glover property, if he or she doesn't agree to do this, what happens then? And if they're not going to make that decision until after the 14th and they have the final numbers, is what I'm hearing. Why are we voting on this before then? But what's going to happen if they say, no, we're not going to do this?
If they say, no, we're not going to do that, we're not going to have an ideal geometric situation there. We could live with it, but it's not going to be ideal what we would prefer. We could make that work. We've had conversations, and we're optimistic that this deal will go through. But certainly, I mean, until the deal's inked and we have, he's paid, we won't know until he signs the agreement.
Mr. Moss?
I just want to correct, we aren't in a position to condemn the property.
That is correct. We are not in a position to condemn.
I know,
Correct.
even if we wanted to, I don't think constitutionally we can. Because this is a private development, privately funded, and the constitutional amendment exclusively prohibits that.
I'm sorry, I'm speaking on behalf of the city attorney. I'll shut my mouth.
I'm not prepared to offer an opinion on what legally is required because couldn't be done, because I've been routinely informed from beginning to end that that's not something that the city would contemplate. So I don't have an opinion on that at this time.
Okay, any other conversation? If I could just make a comment. I think it's incumbent on us as a city that when we have a project that rises to the level of some controversy for whatever reason, that educating the public and public engagement is, essential. And a lot of the angst that I hear regarding to this project regards to traffic and the fact that maybe a comprehensive traffic analysis, not only about the adjacent right there, but also the feeder roads and adjacent roads like Holly Road was not done, that could possibly alleviate a lot of the concerns of, and these are, not only some of the citizens that are living there, but some of the businesses that are there, that are finding some consternation with this. Is there any plan to maybe do a comprehensive traffic analysis, impact analysis, not only about the areas that you just showed, but Holly Road and a couple other roads that a lot of folks are really concerned about traffic?
Sure.
And I think that is one of the cruxes of some of the oppositions that we're hearing about.
Sure. There was a traffic analysis done as part of the development, and I'd have to get back with our traffic engineers and confirm the limits of that with regards to the street that you mentioned, how far out we went from the subject area. But yes, there was a traffic study done. Did it encompass all of the areas that you mentioned? I'm not sure. I'll go back with our traffic guys and check.
Mr. Mayor, I don't think it incorporated Holly. It was primarily vehicular traffic related to the two oceanfront towers on that portion of Cavalier, and then what would the resurgence of the historic Cavalier provide? What was the by right access and the stacking that would occur back into Atlantic because there wasn't enough width there? The creation of the cul-de-sac diverts the lion's share of that, all that traffic to a 4-lane road instead of a 2-lane road in the middle of a curve. It takes into account the impacts that the new Cavalier, the anchor of at the north end of your resort, the impacts it has to its adjacent neighbors, and relieves that, puts it out there on the 4-lane road. The developer has to create sufficient space inside his development for the stacking of upwards of 80 vehicles so that traffic's removed from the thoroughfare, the right-of-way, and it's contained on the property, and that valet parking can service the customers, the convention conference goers or the special event goers, and get their cars parked in the parking garage that he's constructing on site.
Who conducted this? Oh, I'm sorry, Rosemary. You
I was just going to say that when the roundabout came about, John remembers the roundabout very, very well. It was hugely controversial, and so many people didn't want it. They thought traffic was going to go in across the bridge into Bay Colony, and I remember one lady who was particularly very, very upset. She now is a believer, and she says she loves it, and I can't say everyone is going to love it but let's say there were 100 people who hated it. I bet you only about 10 of those 100 people hate it now. It's become highly successful. So,
Right.
So it's just something that they hadn't experienced before, and they really do like the roundabout.
Okay, Jeff.
Can I ask a question? Because I wasn't here when the roundabout was built. Did we vote on that? There was
a major project.
There was a
right?
public hearing. Well, I think that leads to why I wanted to get on board with the resolution John and I put on the agenda, is that this was not going to come to us for a vote. There was not.
It's put several times on it.
We voted on it twice.
But the situation has changed. We put it on to get state funding, to get city funding. Now it's developer funding, but it still doesn't change the fact that it's a public asset, that the city of Virginia Beach owns that land, and the people who we represent have a right to weigh in an opinion on that. That's my entire beef. I go down there hardly ever, but to just say, the number of people I talk to that want to make changes to their roads, to sidewalks, for them to have to go through the diligence of getting a petition to meet 70% of the impacted area, and then for us just to say, well, you're going to pay for it, so great, and not have that process. I feel like we all want to make sure that everyone feels heard. I don't believe anybody at this table doesn't feel that way. And to the roundabout's point, I wasn't there, but there should be a public hearing so that people can come out and say their piece. Good, bad, and indifferent. I think we should see this. If John and I's resolution's deferred or denied, that'll be what it is, but I still stand on that this should come before council, and if the majority of us feels that this is a good public safety project, a good component to this development, whatever our reasoning being, we still did what we were supposed to do and we gave people the opportunity to say what they wanted to say about it.
Thank you. Ms. Henley?
We got this very good email synopsis of the whole background from a former president of the North Virginia Beach Civic League yesterday, I think, Jack Drescher. He went back even to the Cavalier Hotel project and all that was involved in that. But the main thing, of course, is he's very specific about all of the input that the North Virginia Beach Civic League and other communities there had at all of these points. But when he quoted from a letter that the Civic League sent to the city in mid-2015, in October of 2015, when we were looking at this, and he said that the only point that was still a question at that time was how southbound left-turn traffic onto 40th Street would be handled and whether there would be a light there. I think you've answered that.
Yes.
There will be a light there and there will be a turn lane there.
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
So that, in 2015, was the only unanswered question that they had, and he enumerates specifically several times that their board and communities weighed in on all of this, but I thought he did an extremely good job of enumerating the benefits to the community and their involvement as a community. And so I think maybe we've just forgotten how many times the community has already weighed in, and we have weighed in, but this was a very good piece, and I highly recommend it to anybody who has forgotten even how the Cavalier came to be owned by the present owners. It didn't come through the city. Anyway, this was good, but I was concerned about that question. That seemed to be the only one they had at that time, and there will not be a light at 42nd Street, but there will be one at 40th, and it would allow these turn lanes.
That is correct. Correct.
Mr. Moss?
I just wonder, I got calls from people who aren't part of the North Beach Civic League, but are part of the people closest to the impact. Kerry Dockery was one of them, the people at 50th Street, 54th Street, that's a different civic league. They've taken no position, I'm sure some of you have heard them. So it would be inappropriate to characterize that all the communities, that applies just to North Beach, they aren't the most impacted by the ancillary traffic impact that they perceive, because it hasn't been studied, of the cut-throughs through their neighborhood to Holly, while they're already serving as the parking lot for the resort hotel as a Cavalier on the Hill, which we've heard about. So, I mean, that is a very a neighborhood that has been pressed upon. And the city manager is correct. When you go online and read the traffic study, it did not take into account, and did not expand into Holly Road. So I just want to make it clear, all the civic leagues and all the communities have not embraced the solution.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, Mayor, members of council, the last item on the presentation is a discussion about Piney Grove Baptist Church. And Mr. Frankenfield is coming in, and I would assume you would all like to just get his perspective as a leadoff, or do you wish to take the reins of the conversation?
Mrs. Henley?
Well, this one is very difficult, to say the least. We thought we had addressed things when we approved the application, I guess in 2015, for the church. But at that time, and I think this is what's important for everybody to remember, the main thing that we were looking at was the expansion of the sanctuary, and there was a lot of discussion at that time But primarily, I think the concern was whether there was going to be enough parking for the large addition to the church. And that was the main topic. And when you look at the conditions that were placed on the conditional use permit, several of the conditions deal with that expansion, which to this point still has not occurred, because all that has occurred is a sort of an office administrative addition to the original building and the construction of the full parking lot. And I think we can learn a lot from the way all of this was handled. I think that the Planning Commission, when I'm reading the transcript from the Planning Commission that did approve it, right up to the very end, of course, they were concerned about having enough parking spaces to accommodate the expanded sanctuary. And they came up with this design of the parking lot kind of at their meeting and said, well, you may need to make some adjustments or something before it goes to council. How many times have we read that in their transcript? Maybe from now on we need to make certain that if they are not approving something exactly the way it's before them, they don't approve it, they just defer it. Because I think the question that we're looking at maybe was a rewording of a condition after it left the Planning Commission and before it came to the council. But in July 14th of 2015, the conditions that the City Council approved to this, well, here's the black, I guess, which is what was before the Planning Commission, and then the red maybe were some changes that were added because of the Planning Commission's discussion on the way to the City Council. But when you read it, of course, the thing that we were the most concerned about, being able to accommodate all of the cars, was not what we have before us today, which is simply the parking lot, which has been added. And of course, what we have to remember is that the addition of the sanctuary expansion is yet to come. And that confuses things even more. So all of this discussion, and I've got a file this thick, that is during that time that we were discussing the use permit. This is really what has come since then. This is just the parking lot. But so we approved it, and it's on its way, and we thought we had adequately provided for parking for the expansion, and also accommodated the landscaping and so forth that would be prudent to make it a good use. And I think I read to you a couple weeks ago my comments when I made the motion to approve it, that with these conditions, I felt it was going to be a good project. Well, the next I heard from it was in August of 2017, exactly 2 years later, and I'll just pass these pictures around because I think this is the crux of the problem. When the parking lot was constructed, and we knew at the time that we approved it that the parking lot was going to, well, the parking was going to drain to the road project, but we did not see the design of the parking lot. Well, I don't think it ever occurred to any of us that the parking lot would be elevated, and I think that's the crux of the problem. I think all of our discussion for landscaping and fencing was based on the assumption, at least it was for me, that it was going to be built at grade. But because the grade of as it's explained to me, because the grade of the lot, the church lot, was actually about a foot more than the, let's see. At the time of the rezoning, there was no requirement for preliminary stormwater design review as part of the rezoning, so we didn't know what this was going to look like. It hadn't been designed yet. The Piney Grove parking lot site was always higher than the adjacent neighborhood by 1 to 2 feet, so the grade was a little higher to start with. But with the outfall for the parking lot being Holland Road, the new elevations of Holland Road are approximately 3 feet higher than the previous elevations, which caused additional increases in the elevation of the parking lot to ensure positive drainage away from the neighborhood. So we have a parking lot that was elevated 4 to 5 feet above the grade, or above the grade of the adjoining neighborhood, which puts the parking lot to the top of their fence. This was a 6-foot fence of the neighbors. And so the day that I went out there and first saw this at their call, I was speechless, because, you know, when have we ever had a parking lot that was at the top of the fence of the neighbors? And so right away, we have a privacy issue, and that was the first one, and then it's kind of going from there. And I think it's simply trying to make certain that, you know, we just talked about protecting our neighborhoods. The neighborhood surrounding the church is, you know, has been there for a good while, a very well-kept neighborhood. The people, of course, are very concerned about keeping their houses and their property nice. And now they want to be good neighbors with the church, and I think they certainly know that the church is there and the church is going to be there, but they are concerned also about the impact to their homes. And so the city built a bigger fence for them, higher fence to try to help the privacy issue. You know, they came to us under open mic, the neighbors, November a year ago, and sort of laid out some of their concerns. And I think the council said to the city manager, how about seeing if we can address some of these things? And so I think, you know, we've done what we can. Of course, over time, the landscaping, we hope, will grow to be a good shield, but that's going to take several years, especially since I think most of the plants died this year and had to be replaced. So it's this issue that was not anticipated at the time that we approved it that I think is at the base of the question. Nobody's fault, nobody's blame, but it's just that now we need to work to make certain that there are not adverse impacts to the neighborhood. And as I said, privacy is a big question, but over time, the trees and bushes will grow, I suppose. But then the question that is the subject of this modification of conditions is the lighting. And, you know, it's a routine condition that we seem to put anytime there's a commercial parking lot next to a neighborhood. We say the poles will not exceed 14 feet. The lighting will be shielded downward so there will be no spillover on the adjoining property owners. That's kind of what we routinely say. This one says all lighting on the site shall be directed downward and not spill over onto adjoining residential lots. I'm finding out that I don't understand what that means. I thought it meant we weren't going to shine lights in somebody's bedroom, but apparently that's not what it means. But then we also have all parking lot lighting shall be on motion sensors at night when the church is not in use. Now that part is what is being requested by the church to be changed. We really have not required motion sensors routinely, and we also are not sure when the church is not in use is defined. But then it goes on.
Can I ask a question about that one topic there? Because that seems to me that's one of the major issues, and I think it's backwards. And the reason I say that is motion sensors turn the lights on, and the lack of motion turns the lights off. And it would seem to me, and maybe I'm just too simplistic about it, is just turn the lights off.
Well, that's what we're gonna be talking about, yeah. And then it says, lighting on the front and rear of the church building may remain on for security purposes, what will be shielded from residential neighbors. That's the lighting issue, but it's that part about motion sensors that seems to be before us at this time. So that's what we were looking at. But that's what our conditions say according to the lighting, which is what is before us. Now, this one doesn't say that the poles should only be 14 feet. We did designate the height. I think they're 18 feet. And when you put it on top of an elevated parking lot that is high, and at first there were no shields, but they have been since pretty much installed. So I hope we're getting there to resolving this, but that's what's before us. And the other one that is still an issue, I think, is the drainage, which I guess Barry will talk about. So it's just trying to work these things out. Unfortunately, we thought we had done a good job. I thought we had done a good job, but it just didn't turn out to be quite what we thought. And we're just trying to come to some agreeable resolutions so that everybody can live happily ever after, peacefully together.
Have you had your
Pardon?
meeting?
Yes, I did meet with the pastor, and he did agree to talk with the neighbor, provided I go back over and take another picture in the same way that I took the picture last February when the lights were a problem, to see if it's changed or not.
So
And I
if,
will do that now.
I apologize, if deflecting the light doesn't mean we're not shining it into the neighborhood, what does it mean?
Barry will talk about it. It's something about candle power or some such, but I just always took it to mean that the neighbors were not going to have
be
lights
effective.
reflecting in their houses. But apparently it's measured in some other fashion, and I don't understand that, so Barry can explain.
Well, I think that's the assumption that we all made, that we wanted it to protect the neighborhood so that it wasn't shining there.
Well, I think there's a lesson learned is maybe that is the standard, but maybe it's the wrong standard. And what does the right standard need to be? I'm
I think
interested
we
in
have to be
that.
very careful with how we word our conditions and make them all very simple and very enforceable and not subject to interpretation. That's what I've learned out of all this.
Right, right. Well, and other questions to ask, like
And other questions.
elevation of the parking lot.
Is the parking lot gonna be elevated?
Who would have thought to have asked that question?
Well, I didn't, and, you know, when I remember coming home that day and calling
All
Lewis
thought
and
it
saying,
was
you gotta go over
gonna
there
be
and look
great.
at it. I mean, I just don't think we anticipated this, and, but it's there, and now but apparently there's some drainage issues that still have to be resolved, and Barry will talk about that.
Any questions, discussion? Barry?
All right, thank you very much.
In the hot seat.
All right, thank you. It's kind of funny you brought up Laskin Gateway, because I thought Laskin Gateway was the hardest project I ever worked on, but this one is by far the most difficult. So, pound for pound, that's correct. So with me today, I have Kevin Kemp, who's the zoning administrator, Carrie Buchholz, who is our DSC coordinator, and Carolyn Smith. And Kevin is really the only one that's worked on this since July 2016, correct, when Karen left? So everybody else has come on more recently. But that being
If I can interrupt,
Right.
Barry, I think part of the problem is that everybody who worked on this at the very beginning with the community has left the city. Doug Smith worked, I mean, we went to many, many meetings with the church and the community, and Karen Lasley and we were all at many meetings, and when everybody changes and nobody's still, it makes it harder to know what was really discussed and what wasn't. But it has put a burden on these folks who were not a part of that. But Karen and I Karen Lasley and I had actually walked this site a few days before we approved it, and I got the worst case of red bugs I've ever gotten walking through that woods, trying to pick out which trees were still going to be there, and none of them are there. So we really worked on this really hard, thought we had it right. I apologize that we didn't. I apologize to the church, I apologize to you, I apologize to the neighbors, but we didn't get it right, but we really tried. So now we just have to go back and try to make it right.
What's a red bug?
Well, some people call them chiggers, I think.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't know what that was.
You don't want to get them.
You don't want to get them.
It's a lot of fingernail polish.
Hard to get rid of.
All right, I'm going to move right along here. I'm going to break the sequence here, but of lessons learned that we will address in the future that will come to you differently is we have the comprehensive plan requirement that preliminary stormwater analysis is required for all properties in the Southern Rivers watershed. This property would have been affected. It would have been analyzed and evaluated. We would have known that the water table was higher than we expected. We would have known that the road was higher than we expected. So those things would have had some, I can't tell you it would have made a difference, but it certainly seems to me that in the future that's going to make a difference. The other issue is that because of the lighting, Kevin has taken on a project to develop a much more detailed lighting requirements that would be integrated into your ordinance. That will be coming to you shortly. He spent a lot of time on it, and that's where we'll talk about the difference between foot candles and spillover and that kind of thing. You all know where it is, I hope. It's on Holland Road next to the Holland Pines neighborhood. And the road was recently completed, which has a part in the height of the parking lot. You've heard all this before. July 10th, 2015, Planning Commission, biggest issues were traffic in the neighborhood. The Planning Commission recommended some changes, and I totally agree with you. My recommendation to the client in the future, or the applicant, would be do not go to council with a change in recommendation in a plan until you have evaluated and you know what the impact is. So they went a very short period of time, did not do the engineering analysis, and did not know what the impact was going to be to their bottom line and the cost. So that's a very good idea. July 14th, and I just want to point out I started as planning director July 15th. Anyway. The CUP was approved with a full parking. Ms. Henley's told you about that. And we've talked about the condition. All site lighting on the site shall be directed downward, not spillover, and I'll explain spillover in a minute. The council version was all lighting on site shall be directed downward, not spill over to the adjoining residential lots. All parking lot lighting shall be on motion sensors at night when the church is not in use. And lighting on the front and rear of the building will be shielded. An interesting discussion we had with the pastor last week is that he understood that they compromised from 24-hour lighting to timed lighting with motion sensors after the lights were turned off. That was his remembrance of the situation, which anyway, it's a little, there's some different ideas on why that requirement is in there and whether it really works, whether it's really going to make any difference. So that condition was, as far as we can tell, and I believe she has admitted, but she's not going to come and testify, that was written between the two hearings, was written by the zoning administrator. All right, so now this is really important as far as understanding the ultimate build-out. So in January 2016, the site plan process started. That took until October, and that was longer than normal. We had numerous meetings with the engineer and the church on why it was taking so long and why we're having such a hard time figuring this out. Nancy McIntyre at the time and Doug Smith went to many meetings after, during the site plan approval process. So the underground stormwater filtration was needed because we were developing the whole site. There was no room for a typical pond or stormwater pond. The water table was much higher. Nobody measured the water table. So when you measured the water table and the separation of the water table and the system, that was higher. So that forced everything up. And then the Holland Road improvements were raised. And so everything worked to a disadvantage to raise the parking lot, primarily due to stormwater. And from what I can tell, we focused on making sure that stormwater worked. And so it appears to. The construction was from December 2016 through March 2018. The date March 2018 is important because that's when we really get involved in I'm not saying this right, is what is built, is it correct? And at that time, when the construction ends, the contractor has to submit as-built drawings, which basically is a new site plan which identifies what has happened, what the conditions are. And I will tell you, not one site plan and one as-built drawing ever match. It doesn't happen. During the period of construction, things change and things are different. But that being said, what we identified was, in most cases, everything was correct. The stormwater is correct. We do have some drainage issues along the back of the property, which I'll explain to you how that will be addressed. Lights were the right height. We did identify that the motion sensors were not included, so we went through a process with the church trying to understand what the choices were. We identified the planting was not all. It had been a rough winter. Some things had died, so we went through, and most of the planting has been replaced. There are still a couple on the Bald Eagle Road that are not replaced, but for the most part, the church has really responded every time we've been out there. Every time we've notified them in a letter, the plants have been replaced, the mulch has been replaced, the seeding has been done, not to the level that has been supported by the neighborhood, but it has been done very well, and it's consistent with what we normally see in a project. So, May 17th, we start with the concerns expressed by the neighborhood. Parking lot is high. The lights are bright and they were spilling over. They were. The planting, maintenance, and installation was a concern because some of the plants had died. And the drainage along the back of the church was not working. And it is not working to this day, but I'll explain to you how we're going to address that. It has been a complicated. So what happens, they finish construction, they submit a plan, shows what the problems are. We work through resolution on all those problems. It could be 3 or 4 page document that identifies all the issues from a condition of the curb to the planting to elevation of drop inlets. So late May, I guess Councilwoman Henley, you got notified earlier, but in late May or early June is when I start hearing concerns, multiple emails, contacts with Holland Pines. We've got many reports that things were not in compliance. We were told that the parking lot was in the wrong place, we had not met the DEQ stormwater requirements. All those were inspected, and all those, no violations were found. In September, we met with that's when Carrie started on the project. She took pieces of wood in her van and held them up for Mrs. Willie to see them, to see how high the fence would be. So, and then the fence was installed shortly afterwards in December. In January, this keeps on going. We met with the church staff and contractors to discuss lighting design. City manager met with church, planning staff met with church, police monitored the lights. We had police out there during the week monitoring when the lights went off, and at that time, the lights went off at 9:50. But we did determine, we had a photometric plan done. That's where they go out, and I'm going to show you one, and you know, when people say you can't read it, you really can't read this one, but we will be glad to supply you with one if you want to see the details, because a lot of detail. First photometric plan showed that there was some spillover. They could be addressed in 2 ways. One, actually moving the light fixture, or actually providing a shield, which is made exactly for those lights. So we fitted the contractor, not the city, fitted the parking lot lights with shields. We had another photometric study that was done at night, not with the moon, and with everybody's lights out, so that there was no spillover. We found that at the fence line, the photometric foot candle reading was 0.0. Now, sometimes it's 0.001, but basically it's 0.0. And that is how, from a lighting perspective, at least then, we would interpret whether there is spillover. Now, you can see a light, and it doesn't have to be spillover. If it's misty, if it's humid, you can actually see the light reflected in the air. And so some of that but from a scientific or accurate measurement, we have information that shows that there's no spillover. At that time, we identified the issue of to retrofit the parking lot lights to do the motion sensors, and they actually came up with some cost estimates, and they were in the $25,000 range, and everybody has since gone on the Lowe's site and says you can get a motion sensor for, $30. The problem is you can't get the motion sensor for $30 and rewire the entire system to have two separate circuits. But that being said, I think there is a solution. We know there's a solution. It can be done. Pastor said last Wednesday, if this does not get approved, he will install the motion sensors. It's not an issue of contention. They'd rather not, but if that's what happens, they'll do it. Based on our analysis, we advised the church that they were in compliance except for the motion sensors. We've inspected the property numerous times, and the church has always responded and done cleanup. We actually walked the site with Mrs. Willie on April 13th to document concerns, and the church continued to do additional work. They have hired a new contractor, and that contractor is a very expensive contractor. I went out there last week. Most of the areas are very well mulched, in very good condition. There's still some issues on Bald Eagle Road that we have identified, and we need to make sure they get fixed. They have been identified staff even mediated with the contractor and Ms. Willie to get her a payment for lawn repairs, which that came from the contractor. In May, we inspected the landscape at church again. Kevin had issued a letter identifying what needed to be done. They continued to respond. I'll get to that later. June 13th, city manager sent a letter to the church which says, here's your outstanding issues, and you have a choice. You either put the motion sensors on, or you ask for a modification to your conditional use permit. And we continue to work through that, through the as-builts. More re-inspections, more related cleanup, more maintenance, that has been ongoing with the church. And it has not met just to be frank, it has not met the expectations of the neighborhood. From our perspective, it is totally in compliance, and this is a very good project. But there are times when there are little pieces that are laying around. There's grass that has been taken a while to come back. So September 7th, we met again on site with Holland Pines residents and discussed landscape and drainage. October 5th, we sent another letter to the church. During this time, between October and November, Wind Nursery went out and replaced, again, most of the plants that needed to be taken care of. And we have continued to meet with the contractor on the swale. The issue on the drainage in the swale is the contractor submitted their as-built, the swale doesn't work. We told the contractor it doesn't work, and they came back with another plan or another as-built. We told them that didn't work. And they came back a third time, came back with another as-built and another plan, and I think we have something that will work now. I'm looking at Carrie. And now we have clear direction to the contractor to make those repairs. I have no concerns whatsoever that this will not get done, because there is $400,000 worth of stormwater bonds currently being held by the city to ensure that that work gets done, and I'll show you a picture of that. We expect that work to be done soon. We don't have an exact date, but we have identified in detail the grades, the points of elevation, the drainage, how it's going to work, and they will start that soon. To add more complication, because the drainage didn't work, then we had to contractor has to lower the pipes in the underground system to make sure it flows to the underground system. So it is not always just one little piece, it goes to another piece, and that had to get done. You've seen this before. This is the CUP approved CUP, which shows the condition and the church. And then we have what is proposed to basically take out the issue on the motion sensors and have the church parking lot turned off when the church is not in use. And it shows the areas in purple where the shields were added. and it shows the Office of Drainage, the area of drainage concerns, which I'll show you that. In addition, well, not in addition, it's just some other shields that were done. Shields were installed on the back of the church that went directly into the back neighbors, and then the shields were put on those specific lights to redirect the drainage. Now, this is a classic where you're not going to be expected to read this, and I will be glad to provide you the detail, but this is the detail we go into to measure the foot candles at every possible location on the site. So they are all done, and they are all less than 0. And then here's next is a picture of before and after. So the pastor asked that if we would or somebody will go to Mrs. Willie's house and take another picture to see if it's significantly improved. So that was provided by the consultant, and we have a report by the consultant. These are some of the issues you see in the parking lot. The plants are alive. They are growing. They're not growing as fast as everybody would like. There are some spots where the fence has been hit, and that has not been repaired yet. We don't see that as a zoning violation, but we've mentioned it to the church, and hopefully we will get that repaired. This is the area of drainage. It doesn't look too bad at the moment, but you'll notice that the neighbors' yards are lower than the parking lot in this case, and there's not enough depth in that swale to keep the water from going into that adjacent property. So that swale has got to be lowered. It's got to be dug out. The edges have to be hardened because the design that was proposed and approved in the field didn't work. There wasn't enough room to get the slopes correct. So we're going to have to go back. Now, I don't know why I said we. They are going to have to go back and completely redo this swale, and if necessary, there's going to be impacts to the fences, which they will have to take care of. But again, I am concerned about it getting done, but I am not concerned that it will not get done, because I believe that anybody would do that work for $400,000. So, so that
The edges are gonna have to be hardened. Are they looking at polymer injection of the soil, which I know is a thing that they use, or is this some other?
we have our.
I don't know that they're gonna harden the side slopes of the swale. They'll most likely regrade, and it hadn't been fully tamped down. It had just been rough graded. It hadn't been, compacted.
So that to keep it, I know I said hardened, because I don't know how it's going to work without hardening myself personally, but
It's not in the plan to put any kind of armoring or.
You can't
I
use
can't-
polymer injection of soil to harden and stabilize slopes.
I have a hard time believing we're going to get the slopes that you need in that little area, and it may have impact to the landscape. So we'll see when it gets done, and Carrie's on top of it. So some more pictures. This is Bald Eagle Road. That were some concerns. Actually, there's some sidewalk that was damaged, not by the contractor, we don't think, but was damaged, that was repaired by Public Works. And you can see that there are some areas that are probably not mulched as well as the other areas, but overall, the mulch was installed correctly, and there's not a condition that they have to keep installing mulch. So, but the pastor assured us that he has got a very expensive contract, and they will make sure that their church and grounds looks appropriate. Just to summarize, we have been responsive to the neighborhood. We have met numerous times. In fact, we didn't really document all of it with you today. We have pages of the schedule, if anybody wants to see the details of all the meetings and all the information. We responded to 6 FOIA requests from the neighborhood, and that was over 4,000 pages of documents. Except for the motion sensors, the lights are in compliance. And the request for modification is to accept to remove the motion sensor requirement. I told you about the drainage issues. I am confident that they will be resolved. They have been very well documented, even though I seem to be confused about whether the edges are going to be hardened or not. But other than that, and the church has continued to respond. The pastor responds to us every time we call him. and in most cases is able to respond and do the things that we ask them to do. So that's the summary of where we are. One of our attorneys we work with said, well, this is the facts are just a bad set of facts here. I mean, they're just what is the facts is a very difficult thing to handle at times.
Okay.
Okay.
No, thank you very much. Real quick, if we can start coming to a conclusion, we have to get into executive. Ms. Henley?
Well, it's unfortunate that the neighbors have had to complain so much. And that's, has made them look like villains, and they certainly aren't. But when they were faced with this situation, they had no choice. And so, it's unfortunate that, like I say, they are the villains, and that should never happen to a neighborhood. I mean, I know we've got a couple with people coming down tonight, and neighbors are concerned about something that's going to impact their property. It's just natural, and I think we can expect that. I think when we read these conditions on the lighting, it says very plainly that lighting on the front and rear of the church building may remain on for security purposes, but will be shielded from residential neighbors. I believe the city installed the lighting on the back of the church and paid for those shields. The shields were not put on any lights to begin with. They've only just now been put on all the lights in the parking lot because the neighbors complained and made it happen. When I was out there last February, it was reflecting all through the house that I was in. And that it's just, it's unfortunate that all of these things happened and had to happen this way and had to happen to cause, nobody likes to complain, I don't think, but sometimes folks just have to bring things to our attention. And I think, they simply want to make sure that that drainage is fixed before we accept everything, and then they don't have any recourse. And I'm glad to hear that, we are going to make sure that it's followed through and will be fixed to not continue to flood those folks on the back. So it's unfortunate that it's been a very unpleasant year and a half, but I hope it will all get resolved amicably, and I think we can. But, when we've got, and of course the city paid for that 8-foot-high fence, because their fences were 6 feet high, and wasn't really good to tell somebody you can stand in your yard and look at the undercarriage of a vehicle that's on the parking lot. I don't think we could do that. So this has just not been good, but I think we've tried to work it out the best we could, and the city has done a lot to try to accommodate, and I just hope those trees and bushes will grow quickly before the next construction begins.
Okay, thank you all, thanks to all concerned. Hopefully we wind up with a win-win situation. Okay, if we can move on to council comments, please. Any council comments? Jessica.
Just that Sabrina and I are having our town hall tomorrow at Kempsville High School, or Kempsville Rec Center, 6:30, and I think you're joining us as well. It should be a pretty good discussion, and I'm excited that Sabrina and I will be doing the town hall via Facebook Live as well, and we'll have the ability for people who cannot attend because of the holiday happenings, they'll be able to participate from their cell phone if they'd like, via the public input tool as well. So that's going to be very exciting.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay, Mr. Wood, agenda review.
Okay, under ordinances resolutions, we're going to pull item J4. We have speakers on that. Any other items under ordinances resolutions people want to pull? Ms. Henley?
3A, I just want to defer until the Ag Advisory Commission gets to look at this. I've spoken to Owen, and he said that should be no problem, so.
Deferral?
Yes.
3A.
3A, which is an indefinite deferral. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just abstaining on 1 and 2.
Items 1 and 2, you're abstaining?
Not in 2, sorry, just 1. Just 1. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Right, under planning, items K1 and 2, we have speakers, and also K9, 10, and 11A.
I just have one question about change, but I assume that on 8, the replenishment of those funds will be a must-pay bill in the upcoming budget, is that correct? The back, on J8, that the backfill with the sources of money, Mr. City Manager, will those be must-pay bills in your budget coming up?
9, 10, and 11A.
If I'm not mistaken, those were all from projects that had leftover funds.
That's correct. Well, I'll come back later. I've often asked, when we have these leftover funds, why, if they really are truly leftover, why we're not recouping those on a quarterly basis and putting them in some place other than leaving them in the capital account so that the council has visibility on the amount of money that's available to us. That would be great.
Jim, did you say 10 is got speakers?
Yeah, 10 has speakers, 9, 10, and 11A have speakers.
So those are all being pulled?
Those are all being pulled. K3, Columbus 4692 Associates LLC, street closure Bayside District, Mr. Jones? That's good. Okay, number 4, Dory Milford and A. Christine Carroll, Joan Lee, change of nonconformity to dwelling units, 4201 Oceanfront Avenue Beach.
We're fine with that, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Number 5, Potter Properties Group LLC, farm stand and ADA compliant restroom, 1065 First Colony Road, District 5, Lynn Haven, I'm fine with that. Item 6, Little Warriors Christian Academy, St. Francis
Easy for you to say.
St. Francis Episcopal School, Church. Conditional use permit for child care center, modification conditions, rate of religious use, Rose Hall.
Yes, that's fine.
Number 7, for conditional use permit, religious use at 437 North Witch Deck Road. I'm not reading. I'm practicing it. I'm practicing. Bayside. Fine, okay. Number 8, looks.
When in doubt, delegate.
Bella M. Hanson, Tattoo Parlor, Bayside. Then we have ordinances to amend city zoning ordinance. Number 11B, Section 232, Communication Tower. Everybody okay with that one?
Yes, we have no choice, but we certainly don't have much to say about communication towers anymore, and I hope our public understands that it's not our choice.
Okay, is that it?
We got it.
Okay, great. The chair will entertain a motion to recess into a closed session pursuant to the exemptions from an open meeting allowed by Section 2.2-3711A Code of Virginia as amended for the following purposes. Publicly held property, discussion or consideration of acquisition of real property for public purpose, or the disposition of publicly held property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiation strategy of the public body pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A3 Beach District. Legal matters, consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A7, enforcement of zoning conditions. Public contract, discussion of the award of a public contract involving the expenditure of public funds and discussion of the terms or scope of such a contract where discussion in an open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiation strategy of the public body pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A29, Dome Site. Personnel matters, discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of the public body pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A1, council appointments, council boards, commissions, committees, authorities, agency appointees. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Finley?
Aye.
Mr. Moss?
Aye.
Mr. Davenport?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Ms. Wooten?
Aye.
Ms. Kane?
Aye.
Mr. Ernst?
Aye.
Ms. Wilson? Vice Mayor Wood?
Aye.
Mayor Dyer?
Aye.
11-0.